What if the most restricted place on Earth isn't Area 51, but an entire continent twice the size of Australia, sealed by treaties, guarded by armies, and hiding mountain ranges taller than the Alps beneath miles of ice? That question of secrecy gained a sharper edge in 1938, when Nazi Germany suddenly turned its gaze toward Antarctica. The voyage was described as a whaling survey, but the scale and planning suggested something far more deliberate. Whale oil lit lamps, made margarine, and entered soap, products with both civilian and military demand. On paper, it looked like a supply mission dressed up as science. But the timing, the resources, and the military precision behind it gave the expedition a harder outline. This was not simply a peaceful research cruise at the edge of the world. The vessel chosen bore the name Schwabenland. Outwardly, it was a research ship, but its equipment stood far above the standard of a simple whale survey. The ship carried 2 large seaplanes mounted on catapults, able to launch from the deck, fly long distances, then return and be hoisted back. Think of it as a floating airfield designed to sketch an empire across white maps. The presence of trained officers and Navy-like planning underscored that this was not a civilian tour. That detail alone drew attention later, when researchers asked, were they really chasing whales or something larger? When the expedition entered Queen Maud Land, a sector of the Antarctic coast, it did more than sail. Those planes flew out over the ice, sweeping vast tracts of land and capturing photographs layer by layer, covering more ground in weeks than most explorers could cross on foot in years. They didn't stop there. From the sky, they dropped marker poles bearing swastikas, striking a claim in steel rather than ink. In doing so, they covered an estimated expanse hundreds of thousands of square kilometres in size, all staked as New Swabia, named after their ship. The scale of this aerial campaign and its method of stamping flags from above read more like an occupation effort than science. Imagine the practical expense in rebuilding global trade during tense pre-war years. Germany wanted resources safe from British control, but whaling grounds in Norway or the South Atlantic could have sufficed. Why claim a frozen interior marked by shadows where no whale oil existed under the ice itself? The answer, some point out, rests on strategy. Satellite images didn't exist. Airplanes were the high technology of the day, and mapping blank parts of the globe meant information dominance. For an ambitious regime, even an empty continent had value for global positioning, supply potential, and prestige. After the war's devastation, documents from that Antarctic mission remained fragmentary or lost, and where uncertainty begins, stories multiply. Rumours spread that the Nazis found geothermal pockets of warmth, tucked like hidden valleys under the ice. Myths came that they built Base 211, an underground refuge said to house elite escapees when Berlin fell, or even laboratories for technology beyond wartime capacity. In some circles, tales tied the base to secret aircraft, round in form, said to rise from the ice like no ordinary plane. These claims stretched beyond evidence, yet they filled the void left by restricted archives. If we stand back, one can see the seeds of that myth-making. A regime obsessed with grandeur sails south, armed with powerful ships and cutting-edge air survey craft, and plants its symbols on territory the size of a country. Soon afterward, Europe explodes into war, records vanish and survivors rarely speak. From that gap springs a natural human tendency to imagine what else must have happened. In effect, the absence of clear answers became more powerful than any report could have been. Another question lies in priorities. Germany in 1938 faced a tightening circle of sanctions and arming neighbours, yet funds, fuel, scientists and sailors went instead to the farthest reach. Why? Some explanations appeal to practical military logic. establishing territorial stakes might prepare for post-war resources, whether oil, coal or minerals known to sit under ice sheets. Even if exploitation was not yet possible, maps would matter decades later when technology advanced. Others argue it was a demonstration of reach, a reminder that even polar territory could fly the Reich's symbol. Yet the official explanation, preparing for whale oil supply, is not entirely hollow. Whale oil did rank among strategic materials at a time when margarine and soap were mass-consumed. A self-sufficient Germany needed commodities free from foreign blockades. But the operation's scale far outsized a simple hunt. A small fleet of catchers would achieve oil. Mapping flights, swastika poles, and territorial seals did something else. They claimed power. It was that mismatch that continues to fuel speculation today. After Germany's defeat, Allied interest in Antarctica resurfaced almost at once. Here again the mystery deepened. Why would the United States soon organise an expedition of unprecedented scale? Was it to finish scientific mapping, or a reaction to rumours of German footprints left behind? The leap from the 1938 voyage to the later Armada becomes less strange when seen as two steps in the same contest. Because if New Swabia had been simply about whale oil, it would not have provoked whispers of hidden bases. Consider the psychological weight as well. Planting flags in a barren snowfield leaves little impression. Dropping metal stakes from the skies into fields and valleys that only a handful of human eyes had ever seen before, that acts like a signature engraved. On maps later redrawn after the war, those lines and names remained, even if erased in political terms. Until documents were opened fully, New Swabia lived half in shadow, half in fear. This, more than any direct evidence, encouraged speculation about vaults hidden in the ice walls, stocked with weapons or experiments. Legends also grew because of pattern recognition. People saw links between unrelated fragments. A German submarine spotted near South America late in the war, a rumour of ships slipping off radar, a snow-covered valley glimpsed in fuzzy photographs. Piece them together, and a story emerges of retreat lines leading to safety in the south. Whether true or not mattered less than the way those fragments locked into one another like puzzle pieces. The mind prefers a story to a silence. What is certain is simple. The Schwabenland voyage mapped a vast swath of Antarctic coast, extended Germany's territorial claim, and showed a level of planning sharper than a simple scientific cruise. The markers dropped signalled more than geography. They announced presence. Whatever legends came later about warm oases, underground bases, or exotic craft, the plain fact stands. To mount such an expedition so close to global war shows that Antarctica held importance in thinking far beyond Wales. And it was that impression, the sense of a greater purpose hidden beneath dry records, that planted the seed of speculation for decades to come. From whispers of secret laboratories to tales of hidden fortresses carved under glaciers, the Nazi Antarctic story became a magnet for myth, because the official tale left too much unsaid. The deeper question remained: why send so much effort, so near to war, for a land of ice? Until that is answered clearly, the gap between recorded fact and legend stays open. That gap leads straight to the next chapter in the continent's strange history. Because when the war ended, it was the United States that responded with an expedition far larger than Germany's attempt. This one involved not a single ship, but a fleet. Icebreakers, destroyers, aircraft carriers, submarines, and thousands of personnel. Its mission was officially training, but its shape suggested far more. From the quiet swastika poles of 1938 to the thunder of an American armada less than a decade later, Antarctica was no longer a blank on the edge of the map. It had become a stage where powers tested their reach, and where mysteries thickened rather than cleared. the story of Schwabenland didn't end with the war's archives. It set the stage for the suspicion that still clings to the ice. Once one nation had gone to such lengths for reasons not fully made plain, every later effort in the south carried the same shadow. Was it science? Was it resources? Or was it something more that the whiteness of the continent still hides? That atmosphere made the next expedition across the ice, led by Admiral Byrd, feel less like a mission of discovery and more like a reply to a challenge that had been laid down in 1938. From a simple question about whale oil, we now move to Operation Highjump. The name alone suggests training, yet the scale suggests strategy. After the Schwabenland voyage, the US response raises the same unease. Was the official explanation really the whole story? What kind of operation needs nearly 5,000 men, warships, submarines, and a small air force to cross an ocean of ice? That was the question in 1946 when the United States Navy launched Operation Highjump. On paper, it was called an Antarctic Development Program, a training mission meant to test equipment and prepare crews for cold combat conditions. In practice, it became the largest Antarctic expedition ever staged. So large that its scale has kept researchers, storytellers, and conspiracy thinkers busy ever since. Rear Admiral Richard Byrd, already famous for polar exploration, was placed as the symbolic leader. Yet behind him stood another officer, charged with the day-to-day command of what looked less like a research trip and more like the deployment of a naval task force. 13 ships made up the fleet. An aircraft carrier sailed south with dozens of planes on its deck, joined by a web of support vessels. Destroyers bristling with torpedoes, tankers carrying fuel, supply ships heavy with food, submarines meant for undersea reconnaissance, even icebreakers to push through frozen channels. It felt like a campaign being staged, not a scientific survey. The Navy's public notes spelled out a string of objectives. Crews were to build a temporary base called Little America 4 on the Ross Ice Shelf. They would test cold weather survival gear, train pilots in snow landings, and gather meteorological and geological data. These goals read boring and practical, exactly the type of language one finds in official reports. And yet, the very fact that such a massive naval armada was required for those tasks always raised questions. Smaller expeditions in polar regions had managed similar tasks with a fraction of the men and machines. Why then sail south with overwhelming force? The equipment provided an even sharper clue. Along with traditional aircraft like long-range scouting planes, the mission included modern helicopters able to land in rough snowfields. Reconnaissance was a clear focus, with cameras, mapping instruments, and aerial survey teams trained to cover wide ground quickly. Submarines, meanwhile, suggested another layer of interest. Ocean floor mapping, perhaps, or even the monitoring of under-ice channels. Each part of the operation hinted at broad ambitions that stretched far beyond teaching sailors how to sleep in the cold. As reports trickled back, the men were scattered into groups known as Eastern, Western, and Central Task Groups. Some landed near remote islands, others fanned out across the ice shelf, while still others built temporary fields for testing long-range flights. The carrier group launched plane after plane to sweep the coastline with cameras, piecing together mosaics of a continent largely unknown to outsiders. This was a continental-sized mapping project carried out with military precision, not an improvisational voyage of adventure with sled dogs and skis. From a distance, it looked like the surveying efforts of a nation preparing long-term stakes. All of this might have been justified as post-war urgency. The Second World War had shown the value of Arctic air routes, the vulnerabilities of wide oceans, and the need to prepare for conflict anywhere on the globe. Antarctica presented both an empty stage and a laboratory for learning layered survival. But timing mattered. Why so soon after war's end, when the Navy had other regions to secure? Some saw it as a response to whispers of Nazi presence in the south. Others viewed it as a test run for future polar bases in anticipation of Cold War tensions. The fact remains that Operation Highjump was expected to last at least 8 months. Crews carried supplies, fuel and gear for an extended stay, enough to maintain base operations through the harsh winter. Yet by late February of 1947, barely 2 months after the main groups had reached the ice, the effort was cut short. Ships departed, planes were withdrawn, and Little America 4 was left more as a token than a hub. The official explanation blamed the rapid approach of winter storms and worsening conditions. Weather had always been the master of Antarctica. Still, skeptics pointed out that the timing felt abrupt, almost forced, given the scale of effort invested in sending such a fleet. Admiral Byrd's later comments added fuel to that doubt. Interviewed aboard his flagship, he warned that the United States could no longer rely on distance, oceans and poles as protection. The world had shrunk, and hostile planes could conceivably come from polar regions. A curious phrase also slipped into repeated tellings, references to lands beyond the poles. For many listeners, that line suggested he had seen or sensed something that challenged the accepted geography. Was he speaking figuratively about strategic reach, or hinting at discoveries kept out of reports? Because the statement came from an experienced explorer, it carried unusual weight. Here the divide begins, between documented fact and persistent rumour. Some men involved described nothing more than cold weather training, tough operations, and the hazards of flying in near whiteout conditions. Mechanical failures, frostbite, and the logistics of operating thousands of kilometres from regular supply lines were trouble enough. But in the years after the mission, tales surfaced of aerial encounters, strange craft rising from the sea, rapid attacks that disabled equipment, and lightning-fast machines shaped unlike conventional planes. These stories varied wildly, often retold second-hand, but they stuck to Operation Highjump like ice around a mast. The image of American fighters meeting flying discs over frozen seas entered popular culture and never quite left. Some accounts even framed the sudden retreat of the Armada as a defeat forced by unknown antagonists. Supporters of this version quoted Byrd as warning of new enemies able to cross from pole to pole in minutes, a clear echo of later flying saucer lore. Whether such statements were distortions of his strategic warnings or reflections of lost transcripts has never been settled. Yet the persistence of the story shows how quickly ambiguity can sprout legend. To weigh the matter fairly, consider the ground realities. Aircraft in polar zones faced compass errors and magnetic anomalies that could twist navigation. A sudden storm could carry whiteout conditions that misled even experienced pilots. Losses of planes or accidents at sea might easily be attributed later to combat or hostile craft when retold by outsiders. Submarines operating under ice would stir the imagination of crews unfamiliar with their location, creating shapes that seemed strange at a glance. In such an atmosphere, mysteries multiplied. Still, the lasting puzzle is the question of proportion. Why did the Navy throw such force into what appeared to be routine testing? A single icebreaker, a few planes, and modest crews could have established weather stations and tested winter gear. Instead, a full task force including an aircraft carrier pounded across the Southern Ocean. It was as if the United States wanted to project power into an empty wilderness, as much symbol as substance. That projection of strength carried its own message. Antarctica was not immune to great power reach, and its emptiness might one day become a stage for competition. When the ships returned, official reports reached tidy conclusions. Photographs mapped coastlines more clearly. Techniques were noted for runway construction on ice. Personnel gained cold weather experience. Yet outside those lines, the murmur of hidden purpose grew louder. historians and commentators could not agree whether it was merely overkill in planning, or whether deeper objectives included reconnaissance of resources, search for warm oases under the ice, or the chase after remaining German outposts rumoured to linger in the far south. In the decades that followed, Operation Highjump became one of those ambiguous pivots in history, documented, detailed, yet nagged by questions. The sheer size made it impossible to dismiss, while the swift withdrawal and Byrd's unsettling comments made it impossible to frame neatly. Official narrative gave structures and numbers, but between those lines many imagined the shadow of something else, encounters kept quiet, discoveries buried, lessons too disturbing to enter public papers. Here is the simplest conclusion. Scale and timing matter. A fleet of this size sailing half the globe, arriving in a landscape barely touched by humans, then retreating sooner than planned, suggests layers of purpose not spelled out. Whether those layers were strategic, resource-driven, or involved direct encounters remains a field of speculation. In any case, Highjump stands as proof that Antarctica had entered the realm of global stakes, no longer a blank stretch at the end of the map. That significance brings us to one of the most controversial threads tied to the mission. Rumours insist that an account survives, not in military reports, but in the personal papers of Admiral Byrd himself. A so-called secret diary claims to describe flights into hidden valleys of green beyond the pole, encounters with technology unknown to mid-century science, and warnings about humanity's path. Whether this diary is authentic or fraud, its survival shows how Operation Highjump became a seedbed for imagination. And that is where we must go next, into the claims of Byrd's alleged private journal and the visions that have haunted Antarctica's legend ever since. What if one private journal, kept out of the light during its author's lifetime, described events that would overturn everything we thought we knew about Antarctica? That is the puzzle presented by the so-called secret diary of Admiral Richard Byrd. The story attached to it reads less like navigational notes and more like a vision from another world. Whether written by Byrd or not, this document has shaped decades of rumour, speculation, and cultural imagination about what lies beyond the ice. The diary begins not with war or politics, but with a flight. According to its pages, Byrd piloted an aircraft across the South Pole. This was not just any flight over endless white. The account describes a passage into a place not recorded on maps. Instead of a desert of snow, the pilot saw green valleys, rivers free of ice, and a city shining in a way no human construction on Earth had looked before. The description lingers not on coordinates, but on the strangeness of what lay below. It suggests the land was not barren at all, but thriving, a pocket of warmth encased within the polar world. For a reader today, used to satellite images and mapped coastlines, the idea sounds impossible. How could a fertile zone exist inside a frozen continent? Yet the diary insists on this vision, a temperate place, filled with growing plants, shimmering light, and strange beings who seem to be expecting him. To speak of such a thing at the time would have been unthinkable. Operation Highjump was official business, military in nature. The idea that its leader drifted into a hidden garden under the pole sounded absurd, even dangerous. But it's not the landscape alone that makes the account extraordinary. The diary claims the aircraft was escorted by disc-shaped craft, objects often associated with more recent UFO reports. These discs, according to the text, guided Byrd's plane through the valley and toward the City of Light. Imagine being in the cockpit, instruments humming, and watching objects of unknown origin slide into place beside you, as if they had been waiting. The image feels like something taken from science fiction, and yet it is tied directly to the name of one of the 20th century's most famous explorers. Inside this shining city, the diary states that Byrd met beings with an advanced presence. The text presents them as both human-like and otherworldly, communicating thoughts rather than words. In a chamber illuminated with soft light, Byrd is said to have encountered a figure referred to as the Master, this being expressed grave concern over the course humanity was taking. The specific warning addressed nuclear weapons, a technology fresh in the world's mind in the years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The diary claims the Master lamented the destructive path that humankind had begun to walk, urging a change before it was too late. The message at the core of the encounter was simple, yet profound. If humanity continued testing and wielding atomic power, the rest of the planet, even regions hidden from the public view, would be affected. The diary insists these advanced beings have been watching since the mid-20th century, stepping forward only when our species crossed the line into self-annihilation. The Master allegedly tasked Byrd with relaying this warning to the world, and yet, according to the account, when he returned from the flight, he was ordered to stay quiet. This theme of suppression is what has given the diary its staying power in conspiracy circles. The text describes how Byrd was instructed never to share what he had seen. This silence has been woven into a larger story. Governments conceal not only the truth about Antarctica, but also about alien contact, secret technology, and the limits of human power. The supposed gag order fits a pattern many already suspect. Extraordinary knowledge hidden to prevent public upheaval. Whether or not one believes the diary is genuine, the suspicion that things are kept from view resonates. Within the diary, the beings are described as inhabiting vast areas under the Earth itself, not simply under Antarctica, but deep inside. For believers in Hollow Earth traditions, these words were proof of theories stretching back centuries, that within the globe lay whole civilizations. The diary fed directly into those ideas. It gave a respected name, Byrd, to a concept often relegated to myth. In this way, the document not only spun new tales, but also fused old folklore with Cold War fears and fresh post-war technologies. Skeptics, of course, point to the provenance. The diary surfaced years after Byrd's death, not during his life. Historians argue that there is no supporting evidence that he ever entered such a valley, or met with beings beneath the earth. To them, the diary is a fabrication, crafted either as a hoax or as spiritual allegory later attributed to Byrd to gain credibility. They see the descriptions of discs, master beings, and warnings against atomic destruction as echoes of the anxieties of the 1950s, rather than an explorer's first-hand record. Yet historians' dismissal has not removed the diary from cultural life. On the contrary, the lack of official recognition has made it more powerful. To many, the rejection proves that authorities are hiding something. A document ridiculed by academics becomes a treasure in the eyes of alternative researchers. In popular imagination, the diary is a blend of revelation and suppression, an artifact that should redraw history, but is instead tucked away from notice. Its survival in books, television, and internet discussion shows that even as scholars doubt, audiences remain drawn to what feels like forbidden knowledge. Take, for instance, the way the diary connects to the theme of UFOs. It describes craft that match the form of flying saucers, objects that would become cultural icons in the years soon after. The alignment with the nuclear warnings also fits wider stories of UFOs appearing near atomic test sites. By setting Byrd's encounter at the start of this pattern, the diary stitches Antarctica into the larger myth of extraterrestrial oversight. The frozen continent is no longer just a mystery of ice, but the gateway to contact with something far greater. If we step back, we can see that whether the diary is viewed as genuine or fabricated, it works like a geological core sample of its own era. Slice into it, and you find layers. At the base you see ancient ideas of hidden lands and lost civilizations. Above that lies the post-war fear of nuclear extinction, heavy with moral warnings. Rising through the top layers, you find the mid-century obsession with flying saucers and alien contact. The diary didn't simply describe Antarctica. It stitched Antarctic mystery onto every anxiety of its time. The narrative has also been effective because of its framing. It does not describe an anonymous witness, but Admiral Byrd, a decorated, famous figure. People trusted him, and he symbolized authority and exploration. To place such a visionary account within his papers gave it a weight few unknown authors could achieve. Even though the diary's authenticity remains unproven, attaching Byrd's name to it created momentum that has never stopped. Readers continue to ask, would such a respected figure fabricate a story of green valleys and advanced beings? There is also the setting itself. Antarctica is the perfect stage for a tale of the hidden and the forbidden, a place locked away by ice, restricted by treaty, guarded by secrecy. Where else could a story of lost valleys and suppressed warnings feel so urgent? The continent's remoteness guarantees that no casual visitor can confirm or deny the claims, and so speculation thrives, filling the vacuum left by limited access and scarce information. Now, let's think for a moment about the greater impact of this diary. For some, it is a relic of fantasy, no more factual than a mythic epic. For others, it is an encoded truth, half suppressed by forces that prefer silence to upheaval. Either way, it changes how people approach Antarctica. Instead of viewing it only as wilderness, the diary presents it as a threshold, perhaps to our past, perhaps to a hidden present, perhaps to other intelligences waiting behind the ice curtain. It transforms an icy frontier into a stage for encounters with powers beyond ordinary reach. In broader culture, the diary has appeared in documentaries, books, and countless discussions groups. Some television programs highlight it as evidence of hidden bases. Others use it as a bridge to wider claims that advanced civilizations inhabit Antarctic caves or oversee human progress from within the Earth. The diary, in effect, has become a cornerstone, not just a side note. Much of the modern fascination with Antarctica's mysteries circles back to these imagined pages. Why does it endure for so long when the evidence against its authenticity is strong? The answer may rest not in the truth of the diary's contents, but in the power of the questions it raises. Could hidden green valleys exist beneath ice sheets? Could there be intelligences far older and wiser observing our use of technology? Could the world be far stranger than official maps allow? These are questions that touch on both fear and wonder, and human culture rarely discards such questions, even when documents are disputed. One could argue that the diary endures for the same reason old maps, showing strange coastlines, spark interest even today. They remind us that the world is not fully known, that beneath the surface of official history there may still be forgotten layers. In this way, reading the diary is less about believing every word and more about feeling the thrill of possibility. The text whispers that there could still be doors left unopened, continents left unmeasured, stories left untold. From here, one detail stands out above all others: the diary's emphasis on nuclear danger. Whether authentic or fabricated, it hit upon a concern that defined the 20th century. Linking Antarctica, advanced beings, and atomic risk created a story that made the frozen continent feel central to human survival. Not distant, not irrelevant, but tied directly to the fate of modern civilization. That connection gave the diary a life beyond its disputed origin. So, the secret diary of Admiral Byrd remains a paradox. It could be a hoax created to ride the wave of flying saucer stories. It could be allegory, dressed in the clothes of scientific exploration. Or it could be a genuine record of an impossible encounter. Whichever choice one leans toward, the effect is the same: the diary has shaped how millions imagine Antarctica. Even if Byrd never crossed into a hidden valley or spoke to luminous beings, the idea that he might have has become part of our cultural map. And that brings us to another layer in the mystery. For even as scholars reject the diary, Antarctica has continued to generate reports of strange lights, odd craft, and sightings in polar skies. The diary may have been the spark, but wider stories of UFOs keep the fire alive. It is here, with discs said to escort planes and vanish into ice clouds, that the next chapter in Antarctica's hidden story begins. Because once you introduce flying craft beyond our understanding into the Antarctic picture, the continent's silence begins to sound like it is hiding more than just ice. Why do so many UFO reports seem to trace back to Antarctica, a place most of us will never see in person? That question alone has kept people staring at maps of the southern continent, wondering what makes it different from anywhere else on Earth. Part of the answer is isolation. Antarctica is sealed away not by walls and fences, but by a mix of fierce weather, vast distance, and legal restriction. The more cut off a place is, the easier it becomes for the imagination to plant something in its empty spaces. Yet the UFO connection is not built only on imagination. It has grown from a long trail of testimonies, faint signals, and strange patterns, where all the conditions for secrecy line up too well. One reason stories cling to the ice is the environment itself. Wide plateaus and unbroken horizons mean that anything unusual in the sky is noticed. There are few other sounds or lights to distract the eye. A flying object moving against the sharp lines of that silence stands out, and once seen, it is hard to forget. Researchers stationed at posts near the coast have spoken of luminous shapes that hover without noise. Pilots moving supplies to and from airstrips on the ice plateau have told of disc-shaped craft that hold steady over a ridge, then shoot away faster than any jet they knew about. A former Navy flight engineer went on record about shimmering craft fixed above a mountain, only to rise out of sight in a way that looked beyond known flight. These voices may be rare, but they lend weight to the mystery. From these accounts rises the idea that Antarctica itself holds bases, places cut into the ice where advanced craft can hide, move, or even launch unseen. On the surface, it sounds like science fiction, but the physical setting lends it detail. Near Mount Erebus, a volcanic peak, scientists have confirmed the existence of huge caverns warmed by geothermal heat, effectively ice caves so large they rival the spread of a city. In a normal landscape, that fact is only a geological point. In Antarctica, in the middle of a hard speculation, those spaces become potential hangars or shelters. Once the knowledge of warm voids spread, the leap from natural cavern to alien base felt short. It is not simply otherworldly beings who fill these caves in rumour. Some argue they might hold traces of earlier advanced human cultures, as if Antarctica is the locked archive of deep history. Fossils and plant remains have already shown the continent was once warm and green, part of Gondwana before it froze. In that context, the suggestion that a past society may have mapped or even occupied the land reaches a little further. Theories like Atlantis or Lemuria have become tied to the polar ice, with people pointing to underground warmth as the last refuge of old worlds. Mainstream science rejects these claims, yet the fossils themselves keep the thought alive. If rainforests once stood here, who is to say what else might lie fossilized or even preserved in caverns beneath miles of white? Now let's add another thread of speculation. In recent years, satellite images have shown odd shapes on the frozen surface. Domes, ridges, even what look like triangular clearings. Most are later explained as snow accumulation, ice ridges, or image artifacts. But for many, these photos look strikingly artificial. They picture ancient landing pads, collapsed roofs, or entryways into deeper complexes. Layer them with old explorer stories and the claims of Byrd's diary about lands beyond the pole, and Antarctica becomes more than a cold desert. It looks like a veil, a surface hiding both history and secret operations right below sight. The belief in secret activity also links to the design of the Antarctic treaty system. When the world's powers agreed in 1959 to ban militaries, mines and settlements, the deal seemed noble. But cynics note how thorough it was. Why would rival nations suddenly agree to lock away an entire continent? And why choose to delay renegotiation until 2048, almost a full century later? Some argue that the treaty is about resources. Others see it as a lid, a way to close access to whatever exists beneath the ice. Because when access is limited to a handful of researchers under strict control, rumour spreads unchecked. From here, let's consider stories that link Antarctica to the UFO record beyond Earth. In 2017, astronomers tracked an object dubbed Oumuamua entering our solar system. Officially, it was noted as a long, tumbling rock or comet, yet many remarked on its odd shape and speed. Some conspiracy writers tied it back to Antarctica, suggesting the object was less a natural rock and more a craft that passed near Earth, or even crashed upon the ice. A strange speculation, but one that caught attention simply because the continent is the only place mysterious enough to receive it. What strengthens the UFO link further is the culture of withheld information around Antarctica. News from bases trickles back slowly. When accidents happen, reports often emerge weeks later with gaps in detail. This delay creates space for more suspicion. If a pilot says he saw hovering discs before radio contact cuts out, and if that story only emerges long after the event, the gap feels intentional. Add in photographs that surface online with little context, and the story expands. Antarctica, in effect, manufactures conditions in which silence and secrecy are the natural baseline, making any claim of strange craft harder to dismiss. Consider also the scale of unexplored land. Over 98% of the surface is covered with ice more than a mile thick. Subglacial mountains and valleys remain unseen. We draw maps with radar, but even those reveal outlines too vast to grasp. Within such a blank, hiding becomes simple. If an advanced presence wanted to remain unseen, no place on Earth gives more cover. Think of it like a book whose pages are glued together. We know there is text inside, but until the ice peels away, we cannot read it. In that unturned book, any story can be imagined. Eyewitness accounts continue to shape this narrative. The shimmering, fast-moving discs described by a flight engineer, or the quiet remarks attributed to military personnel, feed the belief that Antarctica might be not just a frozen desert, but a door into something else. Some call these tales fabrications. Others suggest they are misidentified weather or light effects. Yet in combination, layered over decades, they build a slow burn, an accumulation of testimony that can't be erased by a single dismissal. Like drift snow, they pile until the weight shapes the whole landscape. Even mainstream science, in its search for microbes in blood falls or Lake Vostok, helps feed this feeling of the unknown. If life hidden under ice for millions of years can be uncovered, then alien visitors hidden much more recently feel less impossible. Researchers admit that what we know of Antarctica's subsurface is still shallow. To conspiracy circles, that admission becomes a doorway wide enough for sources, bases, and hidden cities. Scientific restraint is reinterpreted as proof of deliberate concealment. So what pulls these threads together? Antarctica stands at a junction of qualities: massive, restricted, and unknown. Its silence makes a perfect blank canvas, one that conspiracy and imagination cannot resist sketching on. When a continent is both the hardest to reach and the most guarded by law, UFO stories rooted here feel stronger than they might anywhere else. Because we cannot test them, we continue to hold them. repeating the accounts like clues in a mystery. Even those who doubt end up admitting the stage is fitting. If UFOs were to appear on Earth, they could hardly choose a better curtain than this ice. Antarctica's UFO reputation, then, is not just about flying craft, but about human nature. We look to emptiness and project. We see voids on the map and imagine visitors. And when we hear silence from governments and institutions, we fill it with voices from above. The UFO connection is as much about our hunger to explain as it is about what might truly hover in that polar sky. And there is one more detail that keeps these ideas alive. Signals, radio pulses, unusual data sometimes rise from the continent, baffling the very scientists who study them. In the coming chapter, we'll turn to those signals from the ice, where detectors have recorded events that standard physics struggles to explain. It is here, in the intersection of measured science and outrageous claim, that the story of Antarctica grows even stranger. What if a frozen continent not only listened to deep space but seemed to answer back? Antarctica has long stood as a place of silence, a natural shield against noise, an environment where even the tiniest signal stands out sharp against the background. That is why scientists launch bold experiments here. They want a laboratory cleansed of interference, a place where the Earth itself helps them filter the universe. And yet, in this perfect silence, some of the most confusing voices have begun to emerge, voices that should not be possible at all. The Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna, or ANITA, is one such experiment. Imagine a balloon the size of a building, floating high above the continent, carrying radio detectors over thousands of square miles of ice. The goal is plain enough. When particles called neutrinos strike the ice, they create faint signals. By flying in the stratosphere, ANTA monitors huge volumes of frozen ground, listening for radio bursts hidden in static. Neutrinos are sometimes called ghost particles. They flood the universe, travelling from stars, galaxies, and cosmic events billions of years away. Almost weightless, nearly impossible to catch, they pass right through you and me, through the planet itself, layer by layer, rarely leaving a trace. Catching them requires enormous detectors. Antarctica, with its ice so clear and thick, becomes a natural trap where rare collisions can finally be caught. Now, here is where the trouble began. Anita twice detected something upside down. Instead of listening to particles from above, falling from deep space, it heard signals from below, as though something had come up through the solid earth and burst out under the balloon. By our basic physics, ultra-high energy particles shouldn't do this. A neutrino might slip through thin layers of rock, yes, but not thousands of kilometers of solid iron and stone. To emerge on the other side without losing all its energy breaks the rules. The signals Anita captured were crisp, not weak echoes. If they are real, then either the particle isn't what we thought, or the Earth itself lets more slip through than we know. It wasn't only Anita drawing puzzling results. At the South Pole stands IceCube, perhaps one of the strangest observatories ever built. Here, instead of telescopes on hills or dishes pointed to space, detectors hang in frozen columns deep beneath the surface. A cubic kilometre of ice has been threaded with sensors like beads, each station watching for tiny pulses of light. When a high-energy neutrino smacks into an atom in the ice, it sends a cone of blue light racing outward. The detectors catch it, allowing scientists to trace direction and energy. IceCube has given the world extraordinary discoveries, trails back to distant galaxies, rare bursts from cosmic collisions, but it too has raised questions. Some neutrinos detected there came from angles that suggest impossible paths. They seem to break through Earth as if it were transparent, or bend in ways the standard model of physics cannot explain. So what do we do with signals that topple simple expectations? The cautious answer from physics is to keep checking. Errors always exist. Instruments drift, balloons shake, frozen cables crack, data sometimes makes patterns where none are real. And yet, scientists working with ANITA and IceCube did not toss the signals away lightly. They debated. Were these traces from tau neutrinos, a rare flavour that might skim the planet's edge and re-emerge from the ice at the right angle? Could they be hints of sterile neutrinos, particles so invisible they barely interact at all, predicted in equations but not yet proven in nature? Both would mean new physics beyond today's maps. Or were we watching radio echoes from another source, maybe even from features inside the ice itself? The debate still continues. Papers are written both ways, weighing each signal, testing each path. Nothing has been settled. The larger truth is that Antarctica's natural silence makes any anomaly stand out. When we design a place to be quiet, the faintest whisper sounds like a shout. That can mislead, but it can also signal something we have simply missed before. Conspiracy thinkers fasten to these findings at once. A particle racing through the Earth, climbing out of Antarctic ice, look to them not like sterile neutrinos but secret engines. Stories sprang up of buried technology, machines hidden deep in caverns, broadcasting signals mistaken for physics. The upward-going pulses became evidence of transmissions, proof that Antarctica housed bases beneath peaks or under lakes. For UFO believers, this symmetry was irresistible. Strange craft above the ice, strange radio below it. The two must connect. That is the logic of myth, where separate mysteries fuse into one. We need to pause here. It is not science to say aliens. Still, the reaction itself tells us much. Antarctica does not let independent travellers test these signals. Only the largest agencies sealed by treaties can place experiments under ice. That distance between ordinary witness and result fuels suspicion. When a scientist says, "We don't yet know," the listener hears, "Something is hidden." Humans fill gaps quickly, and the larger the gap, the larger the story. What lessons, then, come from Anita's strange finds? At the least, they remind us that models of particle behaviour were built on observations at Earth's surface, not deep inside it. Just as glaciologists learned that ice holds entire landscapes unseen to satellites, physicists may be learning that ordinary matter holds surprises when crossed by immense energy. Think of it as reading a book layer by layer. You expect each page to follow the last. And then suddenly a word appears that should not, written in a hand you do not recognise. Do you throw the book away, or do you look harder to see if more words follow? That is what Anita and IceCube forced upon the field. The intrigue grows because both instruments are tuned to ask about the invisible. Neutrinos are nearly fictional until captured. When caught, they always hint at scales larger and older than our own. A neutrino reaching ice may have travelled since before Earth cooled. The distance between its birth and its collision can be measured not in miles, but in deep time. To have one rise through Earth as if it were thin, only to burst in Antarctica, troubles every assumption we have about matter's solidity. The whole planet becomes more transparent than glass for just an instant. That is as disquieting as it is fascinating. If the anomaly is real, it might mean our universe holds particles no one has accounted for. Physics lives by grammar. If even one piece of grammar is wrong, the sentence cannot be read smoothly. An upward-going radio burst may be one such error revealed, or it may be a smudge on the page that only looks like a missing rule. Either way, it makes us read differently. The quiet irony is that even rigorous scientific debate creates fertile soil for less tested ideas. Every time a paper wonders if the standard model is incomplete, The broader audience hears permission to imagine aliens or hidden engines. But in truth, what the scientists are saying is more exciting in its patience. They are asking if nature hides a new family of particles. They are asking if ghosts we cannot yet touch slip through Earth as easily as light through water. That is not a story of underground craft. It is a story of physics stretching past its edge. Still, it is easy to see why rumours stick. Antarctica already carries a burden of secrecy. Military histories, restricted treaties, bases closed to all outsiders. All these prime the mind to expect forbidden discoveries. Connect that frame to signals no one can yet explain, and the circle closes. The continent itself seems to answer from below, as though ice turned transmitter. One might say that Antarctica is always both laboratory and mirror. We project stories upon it, then read them back with every anomaly. When Anita detected its strange bursts, the signals glowed the way shadows grow in firelight, as tests of what we most expect to see. For some, that is sterile neutrinos. For others, that is alien machinery. Truly, it may be neither. But the fact these whispers appeared at all in the cleanest environment on Earth makes them important. If you like this kind of slow burn, patient signals, careful listening, tap like so more people can sit with this mystery. Because the truth is that Antarctica, despite its remoteness, is talking to us. It speaks not with words, but with echoes in radio waves, with cones of blue light trapped beneath the ice. And in those echoes, questions build faster than answers. From data balloons above to sensors frozen a mile under, the same puzzle repeats. Antarctica appears to produce signals out of place. Some climb skyward where they shouldn't. Some point back to stars through impossible routes. Science keeps shaving the data, separating artifact from reality. Yet each shaved layer leaves the idea intact, that under ice, unexpected voices continue. Even if you believe no conspiracy, the finding is powerful. For physics, it shows limits of existing models. For culture, it reminds us the continent itself has become the ultimate screen for projection. A place so empty, so controlled, that any anomaly resonates louder than it would anywhere else. Even in the clean embrace of pure research, Antarctica refuses to be simple, and that sets the tone for the next puzzle waiting under the ice. Because beyond rising radio pulses and ghost particles, newer surveys with radar and satellites have sketched shapes below the surface that look as sharp as walls and domes. Some of them stretch for hundreds of kilometres. They may be natural mountains frozen into ancient patterns. They may be products of hidden heat shaping the underside of the ice sheet. For others, they look engineered, too straight to be random. In that way, the signals of ANITA and the lights of IceCube lead naturally to another question. If Antarctica whispers upward with particles that don't fit the rules, what other evidence lies beneath frozen rock? When radar bounces back lines and ridges as neat as fortifications, we must ask the same thing. Are these the marks of geology, or the remains of something constructed long before us? When radar first began to pierce the Antarctic ice in the late 20th century, it revealed shapes that shocked many who saw the raw images. Instead of nothing but smooth hills of compacted snow, the scanners caught sights of sharp lines, sudden domes rising from flat plains, and ridges that looked too straight to be natural. In a place assumed to be only chaos of frozen rock, here were patterns that seemed designed. That opened a question not just for scientists but also for storytellers. Were these lines and domes traces of geology alone, or clues of something built? The Gamburtsev Mountains sit under more than 2 kilometers of ice, and yet radar shows their peaks standing sharp, surprisingly fresh, as if glaciers had not touched them. Normally, mountains wrapped in ice for tens of millions of years are ground down layer by layer, reduced to rounded nubs. These, however, keep the outlines of young Alps. that mystery feeds two camps. To geologists, their existence is the product of tectonic forces and deep burial that preserve their shape. To those leaning into speculation, the ridges can look like artificial walls, set down with purpose rather than uplift. When the first images of these hidden peaks came out, they felt uncanny, like walking into a cave wall only to see carved shapes resembling columns. We know tectonic collisions pull up jagged rock. We know ice sheets can preserve mountains if they freeze them fast enough, yet the preservation is so precise that it looks intentional. This gap between natural explanation and visual impression has become one of Antarctica's most fertile grounds for conjecture. Radar does not just draw mountains, it also maps strange symmetry in valleys and plateaus. Survey flights have caught hexagon-like layouts and long linear scars beneath the ice. In Wilkes Land, gravity readings show one of the largest anomalies on the continent, a mass buried deep, producing pull far stronger than its surroundings. Some scientists interpret it as the scar of an asteroid impact, hidden since ancient times. Others insist anomalies this clean could indicate underground voids, even artificial galleries. The human eye struggles not to see architecture when geometry appears in frozen wilderness. The ambiguity deepens when satellite photos show rounded domes spreading across certain regions. In conspiracy forums, these domes appear again and again as potential entrances to hidden facilities, the neat curves compared to hangar roofs or buried covers. Yet natural science has its own reply. Snow that compacts in certain wind patterns and water flow can rise into smooth domes on its own. Subglacial rivers flowing gently under ice deposit shapes that, from above, read like man-made vaults. When resolution is low, imagination rushes to fill the blank pixels. Take the magnetic signatures as further example. Instruments detect spikes suggestive of dense metallic material under kilometers of ice. Such readings without context are easy to frame as metal alloys stored in structures, but in most cases the consistency matches known deposits, iron-rich rock, produced by ancient volcanic systems. The Wilkes anomaly fits here as well, an intense reading that some say marks an impact crater large enough to rearrange Earth's climate in deep time. Others suspect it hides a cavern the size of a city. Science admits the anomaly exists. Interpretation divides into natural impact or something beyond. And below all this surface mystery lies heat. Mantle plumes, rising streams of hot rock from deep Earth sit beneath parts of Antarctica. They drive subglacial volcanoes that punch through crust or melt rivers under the ice sheet. Lava tubes, long hollow channels formed by flowing magma, are known to form vaulted tunnels in places like Hawaii or Iceland. Here, too, frozen into darkness, such tunnels could stretch unseen for miles. Viewed from above, their outlines echo human designs: long corridors, chambers, vaulted ceilings. It is easy to mistake geology for architecture when the lines resemble hallways. In fact, on other planets like Mars, those same lava tubes are studied as possible shelters for future explorers, proof that natural processes can mimic human planning with creepy accuracy. Now, the link between geothermal illusions and speculation is important. Hidden volcanoes feed meltwater lakes that stay liquid far below freezing surface air. The heat carves cavities so large that some radar teams describe them as vast chambers. To a scientist, these are impressive laboratories. To those prone to suspicion, they are perfect hiding places. If space of cathedral scale exists under ice, why should it not contain something constructed? Again, we see that ambiguity birth story. Because ambiguity is fuel, entire traditions of Antarctic myth have assembled around these shadows. Some narrators place alien bases here, suggesting the symmetry of radar lines matches ancient star maps. Others tie them to myths of Atlantis or Lemuria, arguing that when the continent was ice-free, an advanced culture built great structures now concealed. Modern tales reuse the older fears, stating Cold War militaries carved bunkers in ice domes to protect weapons or experiments. Each claim nests comfort in pattern: straight lines equal buildings, domes equal entranceways, spikes equal machines. Let's test this with analogy. Think of how termites in a savanna build mounds. To someone seeing them for the first time, without context, they look like designed towers, with air shafts for breathing. In fact, they are natural but purposeful in a non-human way. Antarctica's under-ice geometry acts like that. It is natural but complex, engineered not by builders but by slow forces. Yet to human eyes that crave order, the lines look like walls, and the domes look like roofs. Scientists acknowledge both the facts and the limits. They know radar produces noise, reflections bending off ice layers stacked for millions of years. They know magnetic sensors catch stray signals, complicated by rock chemistry. They admit mapping through kilometers of frozen crust is like sketching the bottom of the sea using only ripples on the surface. The uncertainty is vast, which leaves space for speculation to grow. That is why, in careful reports, scientists often stress how much remains unknown. They may not feed conspiracy, but silence leaves room for it. When we step back, the Gamburtsev Mountains, Wilkesland and geothermal fields each mark a continent far from fully understood. In mainstream view, they are products of tectonics, mantle plumes, and preserved geology, no stranger than any mountain system hidden under glaciers. Yet because the shapes are unseen directly, only traced by instruments, their images reach the public stripped of context. A jagged peak reconstructed by radar lines ends up looking like a fortress ridge. A dome formed by snowmelt appears like a perfect cover. Ambiguous pictures travel fastest. In deep time, Antarctica lay in temperate latitudes, part of Gondwana, covered by forests, rivers and animals. Its shift to the pole buried that life under freezing air and time's slow wait. What we see today by radar is the ghost of that old world, frozen mid-frame. It is natural geology broken off from an ancient continent, but interpreted through the lens of secrecy and suspicion. That mix explains why some treat Antarctica not just as wilderness, but as vault, hiding knowledge not yet shared. And yet, take the mountains' preservation. Their peaks should be worn to stumps by glaciers above. They remain fresh, as if sculpted yesterday. The scientific answer is burial and rebound. Frozen quickly, saved from grinding, then uplifted by tectonic pushes later. But the visual impression, those sharp ridges, cannot help but compel the other side. Were they reinforced, their edges maintained by more than nature? This is where Antarctic mystery walks, between what geology explains and what the eye insists. Such blurring of lines matters because Antarctica resists full access. Unlike Iceland, where we can walk into lava tubes or measure hot springs directly, here we rely on remote data. Remote data is clean yet abstract, easily misread. A hexagon grid seen by radar might be error, or it might be rock layers folded neatly. From a distance, it appears engineered. That is why images travel the world without footnotes and acquire new stories every time. Even the real heat beneath the ice extends the air of strangeness. Melting does not come only from climate shifts, it comes from Earth's own power. Water flows in rivers unseen, carving caverns whose scale is hard to picture. Natural, yes. But when people hear enormous hollow cavity beneath Antarctica, they picture halls, cities, structures. They picture space for others. This link between scientific scale and human pattern recognition keeps the myths alive. The truth sits in balance. Antarctica is alive with hidden fire, volcanoes, mantle plumes, tectonic scars, gravity anomalies, preserved mountain ranges, all real, all tested. These features generate maps that, when cropped, can mimic plans of fortresses or blueprints of machines. The conspiracy visions that grow from them are less evidence and more translation, nature's lines recast as architecture. But because ice still blocks direct view, the translation persists. So the question returns, what lies under the ice? The safest answer is geology, complicated, preserved, partly mysterious geology. The more exciting answer for some is hidden bases or forgotten cultures. Both rest on the same data, only filtered by expectation. Straight lines feed the human dream of order. Domes call to the idea of shelter. Anomalies whisper of machinery hidden in stone. That is the dialogue between natural wonder and human imagination, and in Antarctica it continues stronger than anywhere else. The Gambutsev Range remains central to this tension. To scientific eyes, it is evidence of tectonic resilience preserved under burial, remarkable because time should have erased it. To a watcher on the outside, it becomes a fortress, architected deliberately, preserved because of its hidden function. Both explanations pull in opposite directions, and the ice does not yet reveal which is closer, and so the continent of blank space continues to spark suspicion. We must carry both the care of science, noting limits and evidence, and the understanding of how human vision shapes images into stories. In that meeting, Antarctica feels less like wasteland and more like mirror, showing us the patterns we expect to see. From here, the narrative turns outward, not down. Because while radar shows hidden peaks, treaties hold human movement in check. Antarctica is shielded not only by ice but by law. That legal wall, built in the heat of political rivalry, raised questions just as sharp as the ridges under the ice. Was the Antarctic Treaty a rare act of peace or another cover? This brings us directly to the question of why nations united to keep this land untouched, and why those rules carry an end date, 2048, already attracting quiet attention. How did sworn rivals sit at the same table and agree to take an entire continent off the chessboard? That is what happened in 1959, when a treaty was drafted that froze military action, suspended territorial claims, and even outlawed mining across Antarctica. For the first time on record, nations that distrusted each other decided to treat a whole landmass as something beyond conquest. The Antarctic Treaty began in a tense moment in the Cold War, when the nuclear clock was ticking loud, and it solidified into law just 2 years later. The terms were clear and sweeping, unlike anything seen before. Military bases banned, nuclear tests banned, the placement of weapons of any kind banned, activities tied to mining, drilling, or similar resource extraction banned. To balance that severity, the treaty allowed one special activity: science, carried out under a banner of cooperation. That was the single shared purpose written into law. It was as if they drew a cordon across the bottom of the world and said, exploration yes, exploitation no. This creates tension even today. On one side, the official story is one of global cooperation, the best of us working together in peace. On the other, a persistent suspicion creeps through. Was this sudden unity between enemies about protecting Antarctica or concealing it? People ask why a continent seen as barren ice would require ironclad legal walls. If no mineral exploitation was practical in 1959, why rule it out so firmly? Some point to what had already been discovered during expeditions: rare fossils, strange magnetic disturbances, and unusual landscapes concealed under ice. Others imagine that more was uncovered than has been admitted. Another clause often quoted in quiet tones is the renegotiation date. the treaty lasts until 2048, nearly a century after its birth. At that time, nations can reopen talks, rewrite terms, and potentially release restrictions that hold tight today. This long clock is unusual. Why set such a distant review date if not to align with expectations about technology or global demand? The simple answer is stability. The harder speculation says something different, that 2048 marks the moment when resources hidden under the ice become worth the cost to reach them. To understand why rumours grow, we only need to look at the scope of the treaty. Every part of the continent south of 60 degrees latitude was included. Not just the ice sheet, but shelves, islands, and sea. Antarctica was not given to any one power. Instead, it was locked behind the framework of collective oversight. Inspections could happen without warning, one nation checking another's bases to ensure compliance. In practice, this meant any military build-up would be noticed. Yet it also meant no one could probe too deeply without drawing attention. If we picture the map as a board of layered claims, 7 countries with past stakes, 2 with rights reserved, and dozens more watching, it makes sense that an uneasy agreement was the only way to avoid fights. No single country had the strength to enforce alone, so they created a shared rulebook. But what sits beneath the rulebook? To believers in hidden knowledge, this shared management looks less like harmony and more like coordinated silence, especially when the restrictions cover resource extraction so firmly. From there grows a compelling idea that the treaty protects discoveries better left quiet. One version imagines ruins under the ice, fossil records too sensitive for open study, or even evidence of earlier maps showing the coast when it was free of ice. Another version imagines reserves, coal seams, oil reserves, rare minerals that would trigger conflict if exploitation were permitted. Both versions lean on the same question. Why does the most extensive restriction in modern history apply to a place described as empty and lifeless? Because the treaty is real, but the answers are not simple, it has become a fertile ground for suspicions. The secrecy of the Cold War only amplified this. Files stayed classified, expeditions operated in silence, and updates about crashes or disappearances arrived weeks late, if at all. This is the kind of delay where rumour grows thick. Layer that onto an agreement that bars public activity in the region, and the result feels less like protection of peace and more like closure from scrutiny. So let's look at what the treaty actually does beyond bans. It formalises Antarctica as a zone of science. Any country that signs on gains the right to build research stations. That is why today you see a patchwork of bases, American, Russian, Chinese, Italian, and many others, spread across the ice. They are technically peers, but the size and funding differ. Some are small huts barely occupied in summer. Others function like small towns with runways, telecommunications towers, and year-round staff. In this way, the continent holds many flags but no ownership. Science is the legal currency for presence. And yet, these stations blur lines. A wide ice runway able to land heavy cargo planes serves obvious scientific uses, but also looks like infrastructure ready for logistics far beyond research. Communication arrays help coordinate studies, but equally grant control over signals across the southern hemisphere. When we consider how much is spent just to hold ground, the idea grows that these bases double as placeholders for 2048. That is the milestone when rules could change and preparations might pay off. Consider also the Madrid Protocol that reinforced the system in 1991, placing a blanket ban on mining until that same deadline in 2048. This has added to the weight of the date, almost like a marker planted in time. Putting it together, we see a locked continent. It cannot be exploited, cannot be militarized, cannot be mined. until. That single until sparks speculation as to what grand shift is expected. For some, it comes down to resources. Estimations are often cited that the continent may hold immense oil reserves, gas fields, coal seams, and minerals unmatched elsewhere. Taken at face value, these could fuel industries for decades or centuries. True or not, even the possibility explains why nations would act early. Energy companies have long watched. Governments invest in infrastructure on the ice. Airlines make plans for increased access. All beneath the cover of scientific cooperation. Think of it like ice sealing a vault. The treaty writes the lock in law. Everyone holds the key together, but it only turns at one date in the future. That vision alone is enough to keep suspicion alive, because when a vault is locked, we naturally ask why. Others view the restrictions more darkly. They suspect that the bans and monitoring exist less to safeguard science and more to stop outsiders from stumbling into regions better unseen. That view points to reports of warm valleys under the ice, odd oxygen-rich lakes, or radar images of geometric shapes buried inside mountains. Even without proof, the overlap between strange scientific data and stiff legal closure adds edge to the mystery. Of course, there is a straightforward interpretation. Antarctica is fragile. Disturbing it by mining or drilling could unravel ecosystems, alter ocean currents, and speed up rising seas. In this view, the treaty guards planetary stability at its roots. But we must admit, it is the rare case where sworn rivals agreed, without hesitation, to freeze their ambition. That fact alone ensures speculation will never fade fully away. We can see then that the Antarctic Treaty is both sanctuary and prison. It offers the model of international peace at scale, but also the sensation of doors closed. Whether you take the environmental argument or the conspiratorial one, the structure is the same. No military, no resource extraction, no settlement until the year 2048. That long pause works like a shadow on the horizon. What happens when the pause expires is not certain. Some imagine a rush of nations to claim buried oil and gas fields. Some picture unveiling fossils of tropical forests or artifacts from unknown forebears. Others, more cautious, expect the treaty will simply be extended, locking the vault for another set of decades. But even if extended, the suspicion remains that something is being kept out of reach. Layer by layer, Antarctica has been pulled into myth because of its restrictions as much as because of its landscapes. It has become at once the world's biggest protected reserve and the largest restricted zone. Science says sanctuary, rumour says cover-up. Because while the treaty explains how nations act, it does not quench curiosity about what they may be keeping quiet. And that curiosity sends us downward, through ice layers thicker than skyscrapers, into the landscapes hidden below, where beneath the surface lies mountain ranges, canyons and rivers, more spectacular than what we see on open continents. From here, our attention turns from legal walls above ground to the unknown structures and geography concealed under the white surface. It is time to look at the hidden world below. What if the flat sheet you picture when you think of Antarctica is an illusion? For millions of years, the continent has worn a mask of ice, hiding a geography that rivals the most scenic places anywhere in the world. It looks stark and simple from above, just white stretching to the horizon. But when scientists began pushing radio waves through the ice and reading the echoes, they saw something else. Beneath the surface lies a hidden world as dramatic as any found in plain sight. This hidden landscape is not just a curiosity, it is a complete terrain sealed away like pages glued shut in a book. Ice-penetrating radar shows mountain ranges, giant canyons, lakes and winding valleys that shape the underside of the ice sheet. Where the eye sees flatness, the instruments reveal variation. Think of it as looking at a tiled floor covered by a thick carpet. You never notice the bumps until someone lifts a piece and lets you see the structure beneath. One of the most striking discoveries is the Gamburtsev Mountains, a range completely buried under the ice. They stretch for over 1,000 kilometres, similar in size to the Alps, but unseen by any human eyes. Their peaks rise as high as well-known mountain ranges elsewhere, but all of that sharp relief lies hidden below roughly 600 metres of ice. When scientists mapped them, they found not rounded hills eroded down over deep time, but sharp ridges that looked freshly carved. It is as though an entire mountain system had been frozen in place and preserved, a natural museum locked away. The mighty Denman Canyon tells another story. This canyon plunges to depths far beyond what most imagine when they think of a continent covered in glaciers. It sinks deeper than the Grand Canyon, diving more than 3 kilometers below sea level. That is a scale usually reserved for ocean basins, yet here it is beneath continental ice. If the ice were to vanish, this canyon would rank among the great scars of Earth's crust. The curious fact is that it remains unknown to those who still picture Antarctica as a simple plateau of cold. The canyon forces us to see Antarctica not as one shape, but as several stacked worlds, one on top of the other. Rivers and valleys lace this hidden geography as well, forming a watery network that most people would never associate with a frozen land. Planes have flown over the ice, sending radio waves downward, and when the waves bounce back, the patterns show flowing structures underneath. These are subglacial rivers, some connecting to lakes sealed under thousands of meters of ice. A single lake, like Vostok, holds as much water as the great freshwater bodies elsewhere on the planet. It has been cut off from the surface for millions of years, isolated and cold, yet still liquid under the enormous pressure of ice above. These valleys and rivers behave like plumbing hidden in the walls of a house. Most of us never consider the pipes beneath plaster, but if they break or shift, the entire structure changes. Likewise, the flow of hidden water under Antarctica shapes the way ice moves at the surface, affects how fast glaciers slide, and influences global sea levels. It is not just scenery trapped below, it is an engine that matters to the balance of the world. Layer by layer, these discoveries reveal that Antarctica is less of a blank slate and more of a palimpsest, a page written over several times but still holding the writing underneath. Scientists try to read that page by mapping the ridges, peaks and river courses. The Gamburtsev Mountains themselves point to tectonic drama, collisions, rifts and frozen valleys that may date back hundreds of millions of years. The Denman Canyon hints at erosion under thick ice long ago, carving places deeper than any other continental trench we know. All of it questions how climate and Earth processes interwove in deep time to leave such structures below. Now imagine if the ice were to shrink. These peaks and valleys locked away from view would suddenly appear. An entire new continent, in effect, would reveal itself, containing lands as dramatic as any national park. Tourists go in wonder to stand before the Alps, the Rockies, or the Himalayas. But no one has seen what the Gamburtsev peaks look like without their icy coat. It may take another age of warming or geologic shift, but their eventual exposure would redefine maps. For now, this world belongs only to radar echoes and to models built on data lines, thin windows into a thick truth. Parts of East Antarctica add another layer of intrigue. Gravity scans show anomalies, disturbances in the pull of weight beneath the ice that may signal an impact crater on the scale of hundreds of kilometers. If real, its birth would line up with events that shook ecosystems across the planet long ago. That means Antarctica may hide not only landscapes, but also records of crises that shaped all life. Reading these features is like glancing at the faint imprint of a hand on ancient clay. The variety is staggering. We have enormous mountain chains rivaling those known on the surface. We have valleys that make world-famous canyons seem shallow. We have hidden rivers and sealed lakes greater than those visible from space. All of it together forms a mirror world. Yet while other continents wear their landscapes in the open, Antarctica folds theirs beneath a veil. The veil itself becomes part of the drama since it preserves geologic detail that elsewhere would have eroded or worn down. It raises a clear question. What else could lie in that submerged landscape? If there are mountains untouched, valleys never visited, and rivers flowing unseen, could there also be signs of older life held in sediments? The lakes like Vostok could host microbes adapted to darkness and pressure. The canyons may hold deposits telling of tropical forests that once grew before the freeze. These aren't just romantic ideas, they're active questions driving new surveys and drilling. Our picture of Antarctica shifts from frozen wasteland to hidden twin of other continents. It is not blankness, it is reserve. Like a book with the cover glued shut, it tempts us with the thought that the pages inside may hold stories unknown to any other place. Each time radar records another curve of buried ridge, we gain a new sense of scale, but we also sharpen our sense of how little has been touched. The continent becomes less a place of absence, more a place of potential. The sense of contrast is striking. When you stand on the ice, the land feels flat, horizon after horizon of white. Yet directly below, peaks rise as high as mountain ranges, rivers move under pressure, and canyons cut far below sea level. The difference between the surface and the reality is so stark it feels like illusion. Like looking at a painted wall that seems smooth, but hides entire rooms behind it. The revelation of a complex world below changes how we think of Antarctica's past. Mountains such as the Gamburtsev Range likely formed a supercontinent split. They may have been tall, green, and filled with rivers before they were sealed in ice. The Denman Canyon may have been carved by water long before glaciers entombed it. When the freeze came, it preserved not only ice but also geography, offering an untouched snapshot of land from another time. Each feature discovered deepens the question. If we can miss mountain chains the size of the Alps, what smaller but more telling details still wait? Valleys may hold sediments that record when the continent was covered in forests. Hidden craters may track impacts that triggered extinctions. Lakes sealed for millions of years may host unique forms of life. A thaw in the future could expose these all at once, a sudden unveiling of a past we now only guess. Seen this way, Antarctica doesn't resemble other wilderness areas, comes across as a locked archive. The ice is not simply cold storage, it is an active shield. Beneath it lie buried pages of Earth's history, written in ridges, basins, and waterways. While elsewhere erosion erases, Antarctica preserves. That difference makes it both valuable for science and fertile ground for speculation. Every new discovery builds hope for answers, while the blanks fuel stories of what else might hide below. When people imagine this buried continent, comparisons come easy. The Gamburtsev peaks could stand beside the Alps, the Denman Canyon could humble the Grand Canyon. The scale isn't just remarkable, it's transformative. It tells us that our map of Earth is still childhood sketchwork, awaiting full detail. Even in the age of satellites, one of our largest landmasses guards landscapes as secret as any imagined world. So the false picture of a flat, lifeless Antarctic desert is replaced by one of grandeur sealed under ice. It is as if the continent has two faces, the surface most visitors know, and another, more intricate one hidden from view. And that second face challenges us to rethink what it means to say we know a place. In truth, we know only what the ice allows. This hidden world matters for the planet's present as well. The way water flows in subglacial rivers affects ice sheet stability. The weight of buried mountain chains changes how ice spreads above. Canyons act as roots for glaciers draining into the sea. Beneath the poetry of a secret world lies the practical fact that these unseen features help drive sea level rise. The beauty of the hidden land connects straight into human fate. The discovery of the subterranean network also leads scientists to study whether these water bodies are isolated ecosystems. Lakes long cut off could contain microbes that adapted to extreme cold, dark and pressure, creating life models useful for our questions about where else in the universe life can survive. This hidden biology, if found, could answer whether life is adaptable beyond what we expect. Antarctica becomes both a frozen frontier and a guide to possibilities beyond Earth, and yet despite the progress, vast stretches remain unmapped. Each flight or survey adds detail, but seas of unknowns still sprawl across radar screens. It is as though the curtain has lifted slightly, showing just enough to know that entire landscapes exist, but not enough to draw them clearly. The imagination fills gaps with what might still be there. Antarctica may test our patience this way. It teaches that revelation comes slow, not all at once. First a ridgeline spotted, then a canyon depth measured, then a lake edge traced. The more revealed, the more questions rise. It is a slow burn of discovery, unfolding layer by layer, asking us to sit with the tension of the unknown. That is the true wonder of this hidden world. Antarctica contains an entire second geography, as impressive as any other continent's surface. Mountains, rivers and valleys, all preserved by time and shielded by ice, tell us one thing clearly. What we see on the surface is not the whole story. Antarctica is not just ice, it is an archive of entire landscapes still waiting. This brings us to the next turn in its story. For if such mountains and valleys are hidden under ice today, what did the continent look like before the freeze? To answer that, we have to step back in deep time, when Antarctica was green. Imagine walking across Antarctica today and finding not just ice and rock, but the stumps of trees standing where penguins huddle now. That picture isn't fantasy, it's written in the rock record. Fossil roots, spores, and even upright trunks reveal that the frozen continent once carried forests as lush as those we connect with temperate rain belts. The fact that such life once grew near the South Pole may feel impossible, but deep time often holds truths that disturb our sense of permanence. Before the ice took hold, Antarctica was part of Gondwana, the vast southern supercontinent. Linked with South America, Africa, India and Australia, this land lay closer to where it sits now, but enjoyed a climate radically different. Fossil evidence shows not only hardy shrubs and mosses, but palm-like plants, ferns and conifers. These suggest more than a sparse woodland. They sketch a landscape rich with greenery, rivers and soils where roots ran deep. Layer by layer preserved pollen and spores show that these scenes lasted through long spans rather than odd warm spells. Cores taken less than 1,000 kilometers from the present-day South Pole reveal clear signs of a climate unrecognizable compared to what we see now. Temperatures then sat near those of a mild coastal climate today, warm enough to support dense swamp forests that survived even during months of polar night. This means plants adapted to darkness without winter frost. Such conditions require high atmospheric carbon dioxide. Records suggest levels several times higher than today, enough to trap heat and lift global temperatures. Imagine a rainforest thriving while the sun barely rose. Heat and moisture sustained foliage, and evergreen species kept photosynthesis alive year-round. For animals, this meant an environment where food and cover existed in abundance. Fossils point not just to plants, but to dinosaurs walking among trees and smaller mammals carving niches in the understory. At one site, logs lie still anchored to roots, as if a forest froze where it stood. These trunks can stretch meters into the ground, a reminder that Antarctica's icy soil once nourished living giants. And yet, it wasn't only the Cretaceous period that held green Antarctica. Older deposits show forest ecosystems dating back 260 million years, even before dinosaurs emerged. Scientists uncovered fragments of ancient tree species in the Transantarctic mountains, proof that for much of deep time, this land supported vegetation. Antarctic forests survived shifts in continents, in atmosphere, and in sea level, holding out until the planet entered a cooling phase about 38 million years ago. That cooling first covered the east, then took the western peninsula until even its tundra gave way to ice sheets. The evidence forces us to see Antarctica not just as frozen ground, but as a place where climates shifted suddenly and dramatically. During the Middle Cretaceous, greenhouse conditions made the early South Pole far more temperate. Carbon dioxide concentrations were likely 4 times higher than today, trapping sunlight and pushing the planet into a hothouse state. The revelation that Antarctica once mirrored climates like coastal New Zealand presses us to rethink how fragile the poles can be in responding to atmospheric change. If this continent was once forested, today's ice sheet may be less immutable than we believe, but fossils do more than remind us of ancient warmth. They give a time-stamped map of ecosystems that operated under strange conditions. For instance, how did plants endure 4 straight months without direct sunlight? Growth rings and leaf structures suggest adaptation. Slow metabolism during dark spans, followed by bursts when light returned. Similar strategies exist today in high-latitude plants in Alaska and Siberia. That evolutionary toolkit reveals survival through rhythm more than constant growth. Dinosaurs found ways to thrive here as well. Fossil tracks and bones scattered across the continent show that smaller species roamed through these forests. Early mammals, too, left their traces. The fact that such life flourished near the pole broadens our view of adaptability. Life shaped itself for long winters with little light, making use of shelter and food that evergreen forest offered. The Antarctic of 90 million years ago was not barren, it was vibrant. In some valleys, whole fossilized trees still protrude from the ground upright, locked in soil turned to carbon-rich rock. Their roots trace into layers packed with pollen and spores, silent witnesses of thick undergrowth and flowing water that once wound through channels. Logs over 6 meters tall stand as if frozen mid-season, telling us that rivers carried nutrients, soil was fertile, and a complete biosphere extended across plains. To imagine penguins where these forests stood is to stand at the intersection of memory and ice. What's striking is how far into relatively recent geological time this greenery persisted. Only about 12 million years ago did tundra still cling to parts of the Antarctic peninsula. That means that while the core of the continent was locked in glaciers, its edges held shrubs, mosses, and plant life. The march of freezing southwards took millions of years, suggesting a slow transition rather than an abrupt shift. The image of Antarctica as eternally frozen is in fact a recent mask. Underneath, the continent's true past lingers close in time. The slow burn of this transition matters for us because it shows how climates can swing. High CO2 levels not only warmed the globe but thinned the difference between equator and pole. Heat distributed more evenly, and the poles carried mild rainforests. Then, as greenhouse gases declined and continents shifted, ice crept in and forests withdrew north. This global dance illustrates feedback loops that connect atmosphere, ocean, and land. For every page in the fossil record, the story shows a continent flexing under deep time forces. If we treat Antarctica as locked in eternal frost, fossils contradict us. Ancient roots, pollen, spores and standing tree trunks say otherwise. And when we trace those signals, we find proof that this land has swung between extremes. From lush ecosystems filled with dinosaurs to present-day deserts of ice, the shift is not slight but absolute. That tells us one thing: Antarctica is not fixed. It changes with atmosphere, with tectonics, and with conditions planets can impose on themselves. Think of it as a book with chapters buried under the ice. Each fossil is a line, each log a paragraph. Read together. These pages describe a continent as full of life as any tropical region, and yet many chapters remain sealed. Much of Antarctica lies under ice kilometers thick. What stories of ancient forests, ecosystems and climates lie still hidden? Every drilled sediment core brings back new pollen, spores and chemical traces that reset our expectations. The land holds records of a different world waiting for light again. Now consider the implications. If Antarctica could once sustain rainforests near the South Pole, it suggests climates can reach beyond our narrow bounds of expectation. If CO2 levels 4 times higher than today could erase ice and cover the pole with vegetation, then what we face now may also be open to rapid shifts. The fossil record is not just a story about deep past, it is a window into future potential. When the planet warms, poles show the change most brutally. Antarctica has proven that once, and perhaps may prove it again. But the other question is one of memory. Did ancient sailors or cultures far older than our records retain knowledge of a green Antarctica? Might fragments of maps or oral traditions contain clues about a continent before its freeze? While mainstream history avoids such speculation, the precision of some old charts makes the question hard to ignore. If trees can remain locked in soil for 90 million years, could memories also survive, passed in fragments across ages? When you hold this ancient picture in mind, it reframes what Antarctica is today. Instead of a static desert, it becomes a place of flux, where forests can rise and vanish, where climates turn upside down, and where life adapts at thresholds we seldom imagine. Dinosaurs once called this land home. Early mammals scurried across its floor. Giant conifers towered, their roots soaked in streams of fresh water. Fossils trapped in rocks testify to a southern Eden, locked away under layers of snow and ice. In the end, the knowledge that Antarctica was once green does more than shift our understanding of past climate. It challenges our belief in fixed geography and fixed environments. It says that even the most hostile corners of our planet can change. It hints that what we see now is temporary. If glaciers recede, it is not only bare rock that may show, but old worlds exposed once more. Branches, trunks, soils, even seeds may yet rest deep within the ice, traces of a time we call forgotten. So when we picture Antarctica today, it helps to remember that this icy scape hides a greener memory, almost beyond belief. Penguins now waddle across the remains of forests where dinosaurs roamed. The snow we see covers not only mountains but the ruins of ecosystems that lasted millions of years, and much of that record could remain sealed until melting or human drilling brings it back. That story pushes us toward the next mystery. Because if geology shows Antarctica once held forests and life, why do a handful of ancient maps appear to remember that secret before modern discovery? Imagine holding a 16th century map and seeing a coastline that has no right to be there. To us it is Antarctica, positioned far to the south, yet on that chart it appears in detail centuries before accepted discovery. The Piri Reis map of 1513 does exactly that. Drawn by an Ottoman admiral, it shows South America with surprising accuracy. But just as striking is the landmass depicted where Antarctica rests today, a landmass shown not as icebound but as open coast. Standing in front of such a chart, the first thought comes easy. How could a map maker 500 years ago know more about the southern world than explorers who would only arrive much later? We should notice that Piri Reis himself did not claim to invent the geography. He explained that he compiled his chart from older sources. Some of those, he wrote, came from maps far older, perhaps reaching back to antiquity. This raises an unsettling path of thought. If the coastline resembling Antarctica is truly drawn from ancient knowledge, then that information must have been gathered during a time when the continent's edges were free of ice. The last period when parts of the Antarctic coast were not sealed in ice was thousands of years ago. Such a connection suggests that a memory or record of a warmer Antarctica somehow survived into the Middle Ages. Whether one accepts that or not, the possibility lingers like a faint shadow on the page. The accuracy of the South American regions on the same map makes the southern mystery harder to dismiss. The Rio de la Plata, the long bulge of Brazil, they are sketched with care unusual for that year. Mapmakers in 1513 did not generally have reliable global data, yet Piri Reis combined multiple older documents into something coherent. That coherence is what unsettles, for if he was merely inventing southern lands, the rest of his geography would not match reality so strongly. Instead, we face the question of whether he had access to knowledge far beyond the seafaring scope of his own time. And yet Piri Reis is not alone. In 1531, another cartographer, Orontius Phineus, produced a map showing a great southern continent placed where Antarctica lies. Unlike many speculative maps that simply fill blank paper with vague land, his chart carried detail. Mountain ranges drawn with shaded ridges, rivers winding inland, bays and inlets etched along the coast. Modern eyes note something remarkable. Some of these forms resemble the true bedrock pattern later revealed by ice-penetrating radar. It is less a case of broad guesswork and more a shape that seems to correspond to land hidden under miles of ice. This raises more questions than it answers. How does a map maker in the 16th century draw rivers flowing through regions that today are frozen solid, features unseen until the 20th century? One explanation is coincidence. Another is that the chart was based on source material from an earlier epoch, when those rivers did indeed flow freely. Scientists tell us the last time parts of Antarctica's coast were ice-free was thousands of years ago. That gap between geological timelines and human records fuels speculation that maps like Phineus's preserve a fragment of lost surveying. Think of a book where a handful of pages are torn out, yet a few fragments remain pressed between the covers. The fragments give us glimpses, but not a complete story. Ancient cartographic scraps may have survived, translated and copied by generation after generation until they found their way into the hands of early modern mapmakers. If so, then men like Piri Reis and Orontius Phineus were not drafting from scratch, but assembling a memory that stretched deep into the past. Mainstream historians caution against reading too much into the match. They argue that 16th century cartographers often filled gaps with imagined continents. Mythical terra australis, a supposed balancing land to counter the weight of northern continents, appeared on many world maps. Compare enough coastlines, and eventually some imaginary shapes may look similar to Antarctica. In this view, the resemblance is not secret knowledge, but chance, supported by our tendency to see patterns. When one already believes in a hidden past, every curve on a chart can resemble ice-free coasts, even if the mapmaker never intended that meaning. That skepticism is important, but we must also weigh the troubling elements. The Orontius Phineus chart is not vague in its southern outline. Place it against modern subglacial maps, and there are similarities in bays and peninsulas. Even more curious, interior rivers are depicted where radar now confirms buried basins could have drained. how could guesswork reach that degree of match? Skepticism explains part, but it leaves the door open to more unsettling possibilities. Consider also the analysis by later observers who noticed how neatly the Piri Reis coastline fits seismic survey data of Antarctica's underlying rock. These surveys were only made possible thousands of years after the map's creation. The match between drawn outline and hidden bedrock has made the chart famous in mystery literature. If correct, it means the source information showed Antarctica before ice covered its coasts, or used surveying techniques beyond what Piri Reis had. Either way, the strangeness is difficult to dismiss with a shrug. When we ask how knowledge from an earlier age could pass forward, human culture gives us plausible channels. Empires copy the records of past empires. Monks, sailors, and scholars inherit fragments without knowing their origins. A seafarer in the Ottoman world could gather Greek, Arabic, and even older Egyptian works, blending them into a single chart. Each older chart might itself derive from something deeper still. In this way, data accumulates layer by layer, like pages of sediment in stone. By the time Piri Reis wrote his introduction, the sources were ancient beyond his own imagination. This doesn't demand a lost high technology. Simple coastal surveying, with boats, ropes, and triangulation, could yield effective maps, if performed during a time when the Antarctic edge was water rather than ice. If that happened thousands of years ago, the only missing element is recognition that ancient seafarers might have reached much farther than we once believed. It challenges our assumption of isolation in prehistory. Because what these maps ask is not just, why did someone draw Antarctica, but also, who stood on its shore long before modern explorers? Some have suggested purposeful expeditions across the Atlantic long before Columbus, voyages that touched unseen southern lands. Others tie the maps to older civilizations now gone, linking them with fabled cities wiped by climate change. Popular imagination speaks of Atlantis or other long-lost cultures, while more sober voices ponder forgotten navigators along prehistoric coasts. The evidence rests thin, but the maps themselves remain physical artifacts. That tension between faint possibility and firm skepticism keeps the debate alive. If we step back, we see how these charts act like mirrors. For the cautious, they reflect our tendency to connect dots too freely, reading meaning into chance likenesses. For the curious, they mirror the idea that human history is deeper and stranger than taught, with knowledge saved against the odds. Each coastline drawn on ancient parchment becomes a question mark rather than a certainty. The persistence of such maps in culture comes from their tangible form. Myths fade, but lines on a chart stay visible. Anyone can put a finger on the drawn southern continent and notice how it aligns with what only radar or satellites reveal today. This visible overlap seeds suspicion stronger than any story told by word of mouth. Suspicion then grows into entire fields of alternative history, where speculation fills the gaps between map lines and geological timelines. One takeaway is humility. The Piri Reis and Orontius Phineus maps remind us that the past holds more layers than we assume. Whether they reflect lost surveying, copying errors, or invention, the effect is the same. They unsettle confidence in official discovery narratives. Antarctica was meant to be unknown until the 19th century, yet fragments from centuries before show something uncannily like its landmass. Does this contradiction represent coincidence, or knowledge buried like the continent itself? Mainstream scholarship leans toward misinterpretation, reminding us that visual resemblance does not guarantee ancient voyages. Supporters of the mystery cite the precision, the way rivers and valleys fit too well. The debate continues without resolution, which is why these maps remain magnets for speculation. In the absence of closure, each generation can project its own questions onto the old parchment. There is also a subtle psychological pull. Humans dislike gaps in narratives. If an artifact seems out of place, we fill the void with story, whether of forgotten travellers or civilizations swept away by rising seas. In that sense, the maps may tell us as much about our imagination as about ancient cartography. Yet the imagination, once engaged, does not let go. It keeps us asking who else might have sailed farther south, and why their knowledge left only scattered traces. From a distance, Antarctica today seems remote, untouchable. But in these early maps of the age of sail, it appears familiar, sketched as part of a global whole. That dissonance is powerful. The frozen white giant we think of now was, in their eyes, another mapped land with rivers and mountains. Our knowledge and theirs do not align, and in that fracture we glimpse either incredible foresight or deep mystery. Neither answer feels complete. The enduring weight of these charts lies in their refusal to settle into one box. They are neither confirmed evidence of prehistoric voyages, nor dismiss scraps without intrigue. Instead, they hover between. That middle ground is fertile for mystery, because it gives both skeptic and believer a foothold. The result? A debate that refuses to fade after 5 centuries. So we are left with a choice. Do we frame these maps as mistakes magnified by hindsight, or as remnants of knowledge scraped from a time before history remembers? In either case, the lesson is clear. Antarctica, long before its discovery, lived in our maps and minds as something more than endless ice. That unresolved status leads directly toward another riddle. If charts hinted at hidden lands, what about the life that still exists in concealed corners today? Antarctica, frozen yet alive, holds microbial ecosystems in strangest places. Blood-red falls, dark lakes sealed under ice, and organisms thriving where light has never touched. The maps may whisper of past knowledge, but the ice itself speaks of life holding on in the impossible present. This brings us to the question of survival. What kind of life shapes itself in places no one thought could be lived in at all? What kind of life could survive in places locked away from sunlight for millions of years? If we imagine Antarctica only as empty white, the reality waiting beneath is startling. The continent hides small ecosystems that have evolved under crushing cold, no oxygen, and waters toxic by our measure. Instead of silence, these isolated corners are filled with slow processes that test the limits of what we think life needs. They show us, quite plainly, that thriving organisms can exist in places we once thought impossible. One of the clearest examples flows from beneath Taylor Glacier, where a strange red waterfall stains the ice. It looks at first like blood spilling onto snow, but the colour comes from a buried brine rich in iron. That water was trapped underground for millions of years, far from sunlight. When it leaks out and meets oxygen, the iron rusts, turning rusty red. Within that water live bacteria feeding not on light but on iron and sulphur. They run tiny chemical factories in conditions long thought lethal. These creatures prove that energy doesn't have to come from the sun. It can come from rock and metal buried deep inside Earth. Think about what that means layer by layer. On the surface, a glacier appears lifeless, frozen like glass. Inside, salt water is trapped in pockets that never see day or night. There, microbes transform iron into energy, releasing compounds that would poison more familiar life. Yet this is no accident. These organisms adapted, shifting their chemistry into slow cycles tuned to dark brine. It's as if Earth itself built small test chambers, proving survival without the fundamentals we take for granted. Bloodfalls makes the point visible because we can watch water bleed out onto ice. But deeper mysteries lie completely hidden. Beneath thick ice sheets exists Lake Vostok, a body of water sealed for perhaps 15 million years. It is not a puddle, but one of the largest lakes on the planet, beneath 4 kilometers of ice. Pressures keep its water liquid despite freezing temperatures, while geothermal activity from below adds enough warmth to prevent solidification. Within this silent lake, genetic traces reveal microbes forming whole communities unseen anywhere else. Researchers sampling Vostok's water have uncovered organisms that feed on chemicals in rock rather than energy from the sky. Some are entirely new branches of life's tree. Without light, they recycle elements, moving energy through systems in ways that challenge our imagination. These microbes suggest we need to broaden our idea of habitability. Life here is not a visitor clinging to stability, but a builder, creating its own balance in a world without sun. In that sense, the lake acts like a parallel planet, giving us a glimpse into how life might evolve elsewhere. Occasional reports push even further. DNA found in samples suggested hints of organisms resembling larger species, including fish-like creatures known only in coastal seas. Contamination is possible. No one is certain. But the idea alone confronts us with the question: could multicellular animals really be surviving in continuous darkness, beneath immense pressure, cut off for epochs? Even if this evidence fades under review, the fact that the question can be asked honestly changes our thinking. We're forced to keep the door open that larger complex life might exist in worlds hidden by ice. Life in these hidden systems survives through processes familiar at one scale, but radical at another. Microbes at blood falls shift between iron and sulfur, coaxing energy from minerals. In Lake Vostok, microbes rotate chemical cycles that echo hydrothermal vents on the seafloor. Chemistry, not sunlight, becomes the driver. That transition is profound. It tells us energy for life can flow in many forms, and if energy is the only rule, then the presence of ice or darkness may not be the barriers we once assumed. Discoveries haven't stopped at blood falls or Vostok. Teams drilling through ice have found rivers both moving beneath glaciers and feeding lakes that shift, drain, or fill over years. These subglacial rivers connect hidden seas into webs. In 2021, a cavern below the West Antarctic ice held amphipods, small shrimp-like crustaceans living half a kilometre down with no access to the sun. Their presence expands the boundary again. We already expected microbes in salty pockets, but seeing larger motile animals living so far from standard food chains shows how deep adaptability runs. In each case, the same puzzle repeats. Conditions look lethal: high pressure, relentless cold, chemical imbalance. Yet what appears toxic provides new pathways for life. Iron-rich brines become fuel. Mineral flows become scaffolds for metabolism. Salinity turns into protection against freezing. Instead of emptiness, we find adaptation stacked upon adaptation. The story is not one of survival against odds, but of systems building stability exactly in these extremes. Antarctica, sealed under ice, shows that hostile depends on perspective. These discoveries ripple outward. If brines under ice hold microbes, then icy moons around Jupiter or Saturn might too. Europa has oceans sealed under tens of kilometres of ice, warmed by tidal stress. Enceladus sprays water into space, hinting at hydrothermal vents below. When we study microbes at Vostok or amphipods in polar caverns, we indirectly study conditions beyond Earth. Antarctica becomes a training ground for astrobiology, giving us plain evidence that hidden oceans can sustain ecosystems over deep time. This also alters how we view Earth itself. If microbes thrive under ice for millions of years, then similar life might exist in deep mineral veins, cave systems, or beneath other glaciers unseen. The planet's biosphere could be layered much deeper than surface ecologists map. Life may not just coat the skin of Earth, but penetrate its body wherever energy sources line up, whether light, heat, or chemical gradients. That recognition forces geology and biology together. Mountains, faults, and volcanic plumes become not just structures but homes. Layer by layer the story builds: a red waterfall, a sealed lake, DNA in darkness, shrimp-like creatures swimming beneath ice. Each example stretches the border of habitability. Taken together, they show that our earlier categories, sunlit equals alive, dark equals dead, no longer hold. Life can write itself into conditions we once ruled out. Symbolically, Antarctica demonstrates that even the harshest masks may hide teeming networks underneath. This knowledge reshapes more than science. Culture turns it into story. When we hear that life thrives in toxic brine under glaciers, speculation about hidden civilizations, alien bases, or forgotten ruins appears less absurd to some. If bacteria can survive for millions of years underground without air or light, then stories about other entities in caverns of ice gain a psychological foothold. The line between cautious observation and popular myth blurs because both draw strength from the same source: our astonishment at what endures unseen, and yet the science itself stays remarkable even without mythology. Bloodfall shows iron turned into energy instead of rust. Lake Vostok demonstrates microbial survival across deep time. Amphipods remind us that food chains reorganize under constraint. None require aliens or ancient cities to feel wondrous. Each stands as a reminder that the spectrum of life stretches far wider than our daily experience on the surface. We step into imagination not because of wishful thinking, but because evidence has opened the door. This stretch of thought reshapes how we see risk and resilience. Microbes locked in brine longer than our entire species shows that continuity runs deep in biology. Life is not fragile, it is exploratory, pushing into every crack offered. If it can hold on in Antarctica, then deserts, caves, and gas-rich volcanic vents may all be open to similar colonization. Earth itself becomes less a single surface world and more a layered planet carrying multiple biospheres. Now the question keeps pulling forward. If sealed lakes under Antarctic ice hold living systems, what else could still be guarded there? We have drilled only at chosen points, touched only the edges. Vast sections of subglacial landscape remain unsampled. Rivers under thousands of meters of ice have never been tapped. Canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon remain in total shadow. Every hidden valley could host microbial networks tuned to its chemistry. That is why some researchers suggest Antarctica may yet carry ecosystems stranger than any ocean vent or desert crust we know. So when we talk about impossible places, these are not stories of myth, but of exploration. The irony is that the continent guarded as barren offers some of the best pieces of evidence that barren is a perspective bias. Antarctica keeps showing us pockets of vitality. They look alien because we expected nothing and found persistence instead. That persistence begins in microbes and may extend farther into organisms whose existence would change our charts. We're only at the beginning of measuring how far down that rabbit hole goes. Taken in context, these findings also soften the divide between myth and fact. Ancient tales of hidden lands, lost species, or unseen realms under ice start with imagination. Modern data then show us microbes, amphipods, and ancient locked lakes. Reality delivers its own version of these legends, stripped of human drama but alive with survival. The continent forces us to admit how little we know. In that gap, science grows and legends thrive side by side. Even so, Antarctica compels caution. The conditions are delicate. Introducing outside microbes could collapse deep ecosystems that tune themselves over millions of years. Balance they're developed without our interference. For us, these are windows, not new frontiers to colonize. Protected status must remain, if only because these sealed environments are unique tests of life that cannot be repeated if destroyed. Every borehole or sample carries weight because compromise cannot be undone at such depth. And yet the discoveries made so far already shift the centre of biology. What counts as viable habitat must be stretched outward. Energy is not tied to light but to chemistry. Time frames for survival grow not into centuries but tens of millions of years. Complexity emerges in unexpected cavities. With each layer peeled back under the ice, our model of life's reach widens. Antarctica becomes less a remote wasteland and more a mirror showing how stubborn life is across Earth and possibly beyond. If microbes churn in brine, shrimp slide in darkness, and lakes older than human history breathe with unseen organisms, then silence itself becomes suspect. Where else do we assume emptiness, only to find adaptation locked inside? That question lingers as strongly in mystery as in evidence. It is why Antarctica keeps its grip not only on science but also on imagination. Because with each discovery, the line between possible and impossible moves just a little farther away. And this is why Antarctica remains central to global wonder. Because even basic reports about brine or cavern creatures ripple far beyond science journals. They shape popular culture, they trigger conspiracy stories, they inspire astrobiology theories, and they reframe geological timelines. In every strand, the root is real, an alien-like ecosystem under ice. That singular fact is enough to bend our thinking across scales of life and time. So we return to the central thought. Antarctica is not dead. It is layered with quiet persistence, where organisms craft energy out of metals, salts, and pressure. To accept that is to accept that our map of habitability must evolve. Each organism found under ice becomes another witness, telling us Earth's range of survival is wider than imagination once drew. And each witness also whispers that other worlds may not be lifeless after all. This brings us to another side of Antarctica's story. The continent is dangerous, its extremes often silently fatal. Planes vanish in white sky, expeditions collapse in storms, reports emerge long delayed. The human presence there is fragile, hinting at why stories often arrive fragmented, stripped of detail, and wrapped in silence. From microbes in hidden lakes, we move outward to tragedies and disappearances, and to the quiet bureaucracy that controls every word leaking from the far south. Why does news from Antarctica so often arrive in a hush, weeks late and stripped of detail? This is not only politics. The continent itself helps keep its own secrets. The air can change from calm to storm in minutes. Whiteouts blot out sky and ground alike, making sight worthless and instruments falter. Engines fail from cold so deep that even steel shrinks and cracks. Ice slides, crevices split wide, winds rise to hurricane force. Aircraft cannot rely on normal markers since magnetic fields twist and weather turns navigation into guesswork. Here, nature itself creates silence. Think of flight in Antarctica as a gamble with narrow odds. A normal trip in the fair latitudes offers diversions, alternate airports, and ground crews ready within hours. On this continent, choices are few. Airstrips lie thousands of miles apart, often unpaved, often drifting over with snow in hours. A stranded plane or lost signal does not draw quick support, but long delays. Rescue must cross oceans, coordinate permits, wait on weather that tears down plans in a single day. By the time help sets course, days may have passed, and when it does arrive, it often finds not survivors, but wreckage. Rescue becomes recovery. The most chilling reminder came in 1979. Air New Zealand had been running sightseeing flights along a set path. One routine adjustment placed the programmed route straight toward Mount Erebus, a volcano half hidden in cloud and mist. The pilots flew with instruments while believing they traced a safe line. What their instruments lacked was the update. The mountain lay directly before them. All 257 aboard perished when the plane hit the slope. This disaster showed the consequence of subtle error amplified by Antarctic conditions: silence, poor visibility, and isolation merging into a single trap. That tragedy also showed how information moves here. Reports did not reach homes at once. Families first knew of sudden loss, then waited months for findings. Terms like navigational error filled the gap, but these words offered no comfort. They revealed how frail control is when land and climate defeat both machine and map. One simple change in a flight plan, one misread guide, and the entire line between safe travel and mass loss vanished. Now consider how often military flights met a similar fate in the Cold War. Crews flew into fog or vanished without clear trace. Missions remained classified, so details reached the public only in brief lines. Aircraft missing in Antarctic sector, crew lost in training. Families received polished statements with redacted files months later. Little context, no explanation. These quiet notices turned into a pattern. Records had gaps, questions had no answers, and the silence invited speculation. Once a report is reduced to fragments, the mind supplies the rest. A bomber disappears while on patrol. Was it weather? Was it hostile action? Or was it, as rumours suggested, pursuit of something unspeakable beneath the ice? Lacking direct evidence, theories filled space left by secrecy. Families asked questions, but bureaucracy choked response. Between the known loss and the absent account, a shadow formed. That shadow became part of how Antarctica was imagined. Deadly, yes, but also secretive by design. Small expeditions too faced hidden ends. Teams of scientists crossing by tractor would vanish under storms, later found months afterward frozen in crevasses. Reports might emerge in small columns in local papers, short, factual, without narrative. Expedition lost, crew presumed dead. These bland lines stood where detail should have been. This difference between steady life in a city and a sudden void far south felt unreal. Few had reason to ask further, so stories remained as whispers. But silence does not remove curiosity. It plants it deeper. Here lies the effect of the continent's maze of permissions. Every activity requires clearance from authorities tied to the Antarctic Treaty. Permits pass from agency to agency. Reports need approval before release. Experts draft cautious words. All of this slows how news leaves the ice. Families sit waiting while months pass with no certain answer. In those months, speculation flows free. If one only knows a loved one was lost in harsh conditions, then myths about hidden foes or buried bases answer the ache more than bureaucracy's cold lines. The gap between incident and explanation grows in both private tragedy and public mystery. When official journals provide only half-formed accounts, every listener begins to see patterns. And once a pattern is sensed, it cannot be unseen. Crashes align with strange lights in the sky. Delays align with claims about secret sites. The longer the silence holds, the stronger the suspicion becomes that silence is kept not by storm alone, but by will. Still, we can read Antarctica's natural forces as more than foes. They are safeguards of themselves. By making access so difficult, they protect both unknown life and buried records beneath the ice. Yet this same difficulty forms the culture of quiet. Information cannot travel at speed. Aircraft cannot be risked in blizzards. This built-in distance means that when things fall apart, the world hears slowly, or not at all. Let us picture an aircraft attempting a flight path between two stations. In temperate zones, should one engine fail, landing is possible within minutes. Here, one failure may mean a forced drop on ice miles wide. Distress signals carry, but weather blocks arrival. One day becomes a week, snow covers wreckage, and by the time rescue lands, the location has shifted. What remains is not uncertainty created by people, but uncertainty carved by ice itself. That inability to close a story pushes minds toward wild answers. Patterns of secrecy across the Cold War amplified distrust. During tense years, both the US and Soviet Union ran operations in remote areas. Losses on training flights mirrored one another. Reports reached only select insiders. Public release came sanitized. While other tragedies produced open investigations, Antarctic ones stayed behind filters. Contrast shaped belief. Why was a plane crash in one place told openly, while the same in the south was delivered low and late? That dual treatment bred suspicion. Imagine you are one of those waiting for word. The first notice may say, "Contact lost." Weeks later, perhaps confirmation of wreckage, but the conditions, exact location, reason, last words, remain absent. The distance itself denies detail. Where papers add only vague lines, rumour fills demand. Some turn to authority and accept the bland report. Others turn to speculation, linking Antarctic silence with larger tales of secrets under ice. In each case, the core fact remains that details are thin and later than expected. Even modern equipment does not solve this fully. GPS guides, radio beacons, satellite links all increase safety but do not erase the culture of quiet. Ice still swallows signals. Whiteouts still confuse pilot eyes. Winds ground rescue helicopters. Even the international nature of the treaty adds delay. Each state must file notice, record, translate, and clear. Information becomes a file stack rather than a stream. By the time answers form a record, months may have passed, leaving early space for speculation. Antarctica's quiet is not only of distance and storm, but of this bureaucratic pace. Every note becomes controlled speech, padded in official terms. Words like incident, expedition terminated, crew unaccounted stand in place of names and stories. Human lives flatten into categories. The living who wait often hear only silence followed by residue. That gap deepens the idea that something is kept. And in places where large secrets dwell, many imagine stranger ones. If we consider this whole picture, Antarctica itself enforces secrecy, not through hidden hands but through sheer scale and absence. Weather makes rescue slow, permit lines make updates slow, ice mutes search, bureaucracy mutes speech. In sum, tragedy does not become a story with details, but a rumour with blanks. And blanks draw imagination, sometimes toward the simple, an engine stalled, or a fog blinded the flight, sometimes toward the vast, bases hidden, forces unknown, silence kept. The land and politics together breed this culture of quiet. It is a partnership, one by storm, the other by protocol. And it achieves something rare in our fast world. Events without full accounts, loss without clear endings, news that reaches us in whispers far after the moment. Antarctica shows how even in the modern age, remoteness can still erase record. We must remember that those who vanish here are not characters in myth but real people. Families who lost them received not closure but thin sheets of text. Lacking detail, they face the same question we voice now. Why silence? Why so late? When detail is stripped, both family and stranger turn to imagination. Conspiracies warm the cold silence. They are not required by evidence but drawn by absence. And yet, by looking at the fragments, we can test what is true. Flight 901 showed how easy navigation could fail. Military losses showed how secrecy in war reduced candour. Small expeditions lost near crevasses showed how frail movement on ice remains. Each event is easily explained by climate, geography, or routine error. Still, when repeated across years with little clear record, They pile into a mystery larger than each case. That is the heart of Antarctica's silence. Layer by layer, events become records without detail, filling only half the page. Into the empty half, the mind writes its own conclusions. Once written, those stories link into broader myths, alien craft, lost cities, buried weapons. Few of these theories need hard evidence. They thrive because the official accounts gave none to contest them. The story of Antarctica is therefore not just icy geology or barren plateaus. It is also the story of missing detail, missing time, missing reports. The land's own nature allied with politics to produce a noise that is not noise at all but hush. And humans abhor a hush where life is lost. We break the hush with stories, even wild ones, to make sense of absence. So what does Antarctica teach here? That secrecy does not always mean intent. Sometimes secrecy is born of storm, distance and paper routes. Sometimes it is padded by both. In each case, it produces the same landscape. Murmurs, weeks late, thin on explanation. And those murmurs shape how we think of the whole continent. Not just cold, but eerie. Not just remote, but veiled. In this way, the ground itself is complicit. Crevasses, winds, fog, they not only kill, they hide the traces. This creates events without clarity. What really happened there becomes a common refrain, again and again. The repetition transforms memory into legend. Where data is absent, pattern recognition builds narrative. Narrative slides into rumour. Rumour hardens into myth. Antarctica's hush has kept myth alive for decades. Some view that hush as a cover-up. Others view it as nature's stubbornness at work. No matter which, the result for those on the outside is the same. Long silence, little detail, fertile ground for wonder. This is how the culture of quiet builds. Every storm, every file delayed, every aircraft swallowed by ice deepens it. But even silences have timelines. Because the Antarctic Treaty set its clock, and the year 2048 leads many to stop and wonder. If now we hear silence, what might be spoken then? Will clarity arrive, or will exploitation bury silence under new distractions? That is the next question we must face. Antarctica's great hush may not hold forever. When new access begins, will truth be louder than rumour? From here, we walk toward that point in time, where the long quiet may collide with sudden transparency. What might be revealed when both geology and governance meet their deadlines together? The continent's deep silence has shaped culture for decades. The countdown toward 2048 decides whether that silence will finally fracture. What happens when one of the last untouched places on Earth suddenly comes under review? That's the question the world faces in 2048, when the protections written into the Antarctic Treaty can be renegotiated. Notice that it's not a simple renewal. It's not just automatically extended. Instead, every clause can be re-examined, rewritten, or cast aside. That moment changes the weight of every move being made there today, because what looks like research now might be a claim later. Think of a game of chess played in slow motion. Each side moves pieces carefully, quietly, almost politely. On the surface, it's cooperative science, measurements of climate, drilling ice cores, building new weather stations. But underneath, everyone sees the same clock ticking toward 2048. What is really being built? Which bases will double as footholds in a coming rush? And how do you tell pure discovery from disguised preparation? China, for instance, has been quick to establish a stronger hand on the board. Several of its new Antarctic stations boast ice runways long and strong enough to handle heavy cargo planes. These aren't just ski landing strips for small science flights. They're large enough to receive major transport aircraft year-round. Officially, the purpose is to move scientific teams and equipment to inland research posts. but the same infrastructure could move excavation gear, fuel, or even military-grade supplies should rules change down the line. Framed as climate research, the capacity is there for something broader. Russia has chosen another strategy: drills sunk deep through the ice and mapping missions spanning vast stretches of the continent. Drilling cores into subglacial lakes reads as science, studying microbial life in hidden waters. But drilling also provides direct geological samples, showing what mineral wealth lies below. Surveys that plot fault lines, density changes, and magnetic patterns help scientists build models of Earth's history. Yet they are just as useful for locating coal seams, oil traps, and pockets of natural gas. So what looks like pure geology also lays out a resource map for later use. The United States maintains a different image, a quieter but equally firm presence. At McMurdo Station, the largest hub on the continent, communication systems have expanded well beyond the needs of isolated research teams. Wide bandwidth links tie into satellites, high-capacity logistics routes feed in and out, and transport upgrades go far past measured resupply. Once again, the official story is efficiency for experiments. Yet these upgrades also mean that when activity grows, whether science or resource work, the infrastructure can support it without delay. Planning years ahead becomes visible in these present changes. These state powers draw most attention, but another player is stepping onto the ice: corporations. Some are energy giants bankrolling climate studies. Others are firms specialising in mining equipment or rare earth extraction. They fund academic teams under the label of pure research. Yet the gear being tested, ice-penetrating technologies, advanced drills, even autonomous rovers, carries obvious use for mining. Why pay to refine such tools on the most remote continent if not expecting to use them when laws shift? For companies, 2048 is less a mystery date and more a countdown. Even nations without large permanent facilities play this sort of long game. Smaller treaty partners have begun joining together, forming technical alliances. A country with little reach on its own gains it by linking with others. These partnerships might not matter much while strict bans hold. But when rules get revised, each joint project could be used as precedent for wider claims. Legal groundwork is being prepared now, silent and slow. It's less about current activity and more about lining up proof of presence when resource rights are debated. Here is where the treaty structure becomes so unusual. Unlike other global agreements, it set a clear horizon nearly a century in the future. The 2048 clause is not an accident. It means planners long ago recognised that interests would change, that advances in technology or pressure of resources would demand a reassessment. The countdown ensures that every action today is written with tomorrow in mind. A runway, a communications array, a drill core, a bunkered supply cache, all of it doubles as evidence of preparedness. We can look at the pattern like layers in ice. Each new base, each survey, each runway is a layer building toward a thicker record. When the day comes that the treaty is reviewed, those layers will be read. Who maintained presence? Who invested the most? Whose work was sustained, detailed, and costly? No country wants to arrive at that date empty-handed. They want a stack of layers to present, a story to tell that justifies wider rights. Think of what lies locked away beneath the sheet. Estimates suggest Antarctica hides enormous reserves of oil and gas. Canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon could conceal stores of minerals. The crust is rich with rare earth elements crucial for modern technology, from batteries to electronics. Each of these resources grows more valuable as global demand rises. The oil fields already charted in seas near the Antarctic margin serve as reminders. giant sponges of petroleum within reach once drilling through or around ice becomes economical. So the investment today isn't just pride, it's potential control of later wealth. At the same time, the environment raises deep concern. Antarctica holds ice sheets that regulate global climate and sea levels. Mining operations, oil platforms, or heavy shipping risk more than local damage. They threaten fragile balances worldwide. An oil spill in the remote Weddell Sea would be nearly impossible to contain. Dust and soot from industrial machines darkening ice would speed melt. Wildlife dependent on icy coasts could collapse if disturbed. This knowledge complicates the coming decisions. Preservation stands against profit, and in the middle lie questions with no clean compromises. Geopolitically, the issue stirs sharp edges. Territorial claims by different nations overlap even now, frozen under the treaty. If extraction begins, disputes over who owns what will resurface. Borders never settled may ignite rows. Add to this the reality of shifting global power balances. Today's allies may be tomorrow's rivals, especially when faced with untapped wealth inside one of Earth's last great reserves. What was once cooperation could transform rapidly into contest. The political maps already contain the fault lines, so we might ask, is the treaty itself a shield for peace, or a holding pattern that only delays inevitable conflict? For nearly a century, it has worked surprisingly well. Scientists from enemy nations lived side by side in neutral huts, sharing data and resources. Military activity for the most part remained absent, but underneath that calm there was always the other clock, the quiet awareness that these conditions were not written forever. Instead, they were drafted as a pause with an end date. The presence of corporations adds a twist. Unlike states bound by the treaty, companies are not signatories. They rely on rules built by governments, but they push hard behind the scenes. Funding of studies gives them a foothold in science stations, where data feeds back into offices far away. Some of these studies centre on mineral content in rocks. Others test drilling systems able to function in permafrost conditions. It may look like disinterested science, but each discovery has dual lessons, one for climate, another for commerce. The boundary blurs. The language of law becomes crucial here. Exploration is permitted under specific conditions. Extraction is banned. But the line between exploring a mineral deposit and preparing to extract it is thin. How deep can you drill before it shifts from survey to exploitation? How broad a map can you create before it counts as resource prospecting? These questions are not just technical. They are legal seeds planted now to be harvested in 2048. One side will argue that exploration equals claimed interest. Another will resist, pointing to preservation commitments. The groundwork for both cases is being laid stone by stone. The treaty's unusual review date also has psychological weight. It creates a sense of waiting, of stored tension. Every new report, every satellite image, every expansion of a runway echoes differently against that set horizon. There is a slow burn feeling, as though the continent itself is a vault sealed by time. The combination of deep time geology, millennia of ice buildup, and a mid-21st century political deadline creates a mix both ancient and urgent. The land waits patiently, humans do not, and yet the risk of opening this vault is immense. If new resource markets explode in the middle of climate crisis, Antarctica could turn from symbol of peace to front line of exploitation. A continent once framed as a sanctuary for science might transform into the world's final scramble for oil, gas and minerals. We cannot know all outcomes, but we can see the direction of the pieces shifting into place. The practical images are stark. Cargo planes night shifting down icy runways that were built for research. heavy drills sampling not just ice but the rock below claimed for climate records, communications hubs that can guide fleets as easily as telescope data. Each of these steps longer than needed for simple science, simpler than justified by pure exploration, and yet each explained neatly by science if one chooses to see it that way. Dual use is the phrase, but intent hides behind it. If you pause and picture 2048 arriving, the scene is a conference table ringed by nations, each with stacks of reports, maps, and claims. Each presents their layers like evidence. We stayed, we studied, we invested, therefore we should reap. But around that table also sit environmental voices warning of collapse, scientists describing fragile ecosystems, lawyers pointing to precedents, and in the background, corporations waiting for contracts to be signed. That is the negotiation scene written between the lines of today's news. The deeper puzzle, though, links back to all we've already seen in this story. From rumours of hidden bases, to mysterious maps, to unexplained signals rising through the ice, much of the mystery of Antarctica rests on suspicion that more lies underneath than what we're shown. If 2048 unfolds as a resource rush, buried secrets may rise not because nations want them revealed, but because drills, mines, and melting glaciers expose them bit by bit. Once machines cut into places sealed for millions of years, silence ends. And that may explain why interest in Antarctica has always carried two faces. The official one shows science huts, climate charts, shared data on rising seas. The shadow face sees a countdown clock to hidden reserves, ancient records, and maybe stranger finds beneath. Both exist together, and both point their eyes at the year 2048. When that date comes, the ice blocking this story may begin to crack, under pressure not only from warming climate but from human hunger as well. From here, the strands begin to knot together. This looming review does not just concern oil or gas, it ties to every layer of uncertainty around Antarctica. The rumours of civilizations, the signals, the missing aircraft, the strange magnetic domains. Because when the drive to exploit resources becomes strong enough, whatever lies beneath the ice, whether natural or not, will come to light. It may not be what anyone expected, but the pressure ensures something will surface. In 2048, the Antarctic Treaty will be reviewed, and a long pause will end. For nearly a century, the ice has been guarded by promises of peace, science, and restraint. That horizon is now close enough to picture. Some see oil, gas, and minerals waiting under the ice. Others imagine ruins or signals preserved in deep time. The truth may hold both the practical and the extraordinary. The question is not if Antarctica hides something. It is whether we are prepared for what emerges when restriction lifts, the glaciers retreat, and the frozen record begins to speak.